What if I told you the very thing society taught you to suppress, your raw, untamed sexual energy, is actually the hidden engine behind your purpose, your creativity, your deepest power? That the urges you're ashamed to speak of are not distractions, but messages, coded signals from your unconscious begging you to wake up. You chase success, discipline, and control, but why then do you still feel hollow at the peak of your performance? Strange, isn't it, how a single glance, a forbidden thought, or a midnight craving can shatter your mental fortress faster than years of hard work? This isn't about lust. It's about the part of you that's been locked away, the primal self that remembers who you are before the world told you who to be. Ever wonder why your dreams keep whispering what your ego keeps silencing? Or why every major downfall in history began not with war, but with desire? Sit with that discomfort. Let it burn, because what you're about to hear will either awaken you or haunt you. Sexual energy is not merely a physical impulse or a fleeting desire. It is the most primal force of life, embedded within every human as the foundation of both biological and spiritual existence. It is the origin of creation itself, not just in the act of reproduction, but in the birth of ideas, passions, innovations, and even revolutions of thought. When we look deeper, beyond the surface-level associations with sex, we find that sexual energy is a metaphor for life force, a current running beneath our consciousness that shapes who we are, how we relate, and what we bring into the world. It stirs within us from the earliest stages of development and never leaves. It simply evolves, changes shape, and either propels us forward or traps us in cycles of repression and confusion. This energy, when misunderstood or suppressed, mutates into anxiety, guilt, and shame. But when it is acknowledged, honored, and directed with intention, it becomes a sacred fuel that awakens higher states of awareness and unlocks potential we never knew we had. In ancient traditions and spiritual systems across cultures, sexual energy was often seen as a divine power, something to be revered, not hidden. Tantra, for instance, teaches that this energy is the same force that connects us to the universe, a bridge between the earthly and the transcendent. It wasn't always about pleasure or indulgence, but about presence, depth, and the merging of inner polarities. In psychological terms, sexual energy represents the push toward individuation, the process of becoming whole. It brings to light the disowned parts of ourselves, the unexpressed desires and emotional truths that, when integrated, lead us toward our most authentic identity. It is not random or chaotic. It is purposeful, intelligent, and deeply symbolic. Many of our most celebrated works of art, music, literature, and philosophy were born out of this force. The artist in the studio, consumed by obsession; the inventor, restless with an idea that won't let him sleep; the poet, drawn to write about longing that has no name. These are not just expressions of skill. They are outpourings of energy that originate from the same root as sexual desire. It is the urge to create, to unite, to give birth, not just to offspring, but to beauty, to meaning, to something that lives beyond the self. Every act of true creation is an act of surrender, and in that surrender lies the same vulnerability and intensity found in moments of intimate connection. To create is to be exposed, to strip away the protective layers and let the rawness emerge. This is why some of the most brilliant minds have also been the most tormented, because they could not separate their creative drive from the emotional weight that came with it. Sexual energy also plays a crucial role in our relationships, not only in the romantic or physical sense, but in how we attach, detach, trust, and connect. It influences our capacity for empathy, our fear of abandonment, our craving for validation, and our need to be seen and desired. Every heartbreak, every obsession, every power struggle in a relationship is, in essence, a dance of energies trying to find harmony. We are often drawn to others not for who they are on the surface, but for what they activate within us, dormant pieces of ourselves seeking expression or healing. These dynamics, when left unconscious, lead to repeated patterns and emotional turmoil. But when we bring awareness to the energy underneath our attraction or repulsion, we begin to reclaim power over our emotional landscape. In the realm of spirituality, sexual energy becomes a portal to transcendence. It has the potential to dissolve the ego, to blur the lines between self and other, to elevate consciousness beyond the physical. When channeled with awareness, it leads to states of flow, connection, and even enlightenment. This doesn't require celibacy or indulgence. It requires integration, to neither deny the energy nor be enslaved by it, but to master it as a force for inner evolution. Most people live disconnected from their core desires, terrified of what they might uncover if they looked within. But it is only through this inner excavation that the real transformation begins. Shadow work, a cornerstone of deep psychological healing, often begins with examining the hidden aspects of our sexuality, the taboo fantasies, the suppressed cravings, the unresolved traumas that silently dictate our behavior. It is in facing these shadows without judgment that we retrieve the lost parts of ourselves. Fear is often the gatekeeper to this energy, fear of being too much, not enough, too vulnerable, too exposed. Yet, what we fear the most usually holds the key to our deepest healing. The modern world teaches us to compartmentalize, to put sex in one box, spirit in another, and creativity in yet another. But the psyche doesn't work that way. Everything is connected. When we separate these energies, we weaken our internal power grid. But when we bring them together, when we allow sexual energy to rise through the spine and light up the mind and heart, it becomes a fire that illuminates our path. This is why people who are in touch with their sexuality often exude a magnetic confidence, not because of physical appearance, but because they are aligned with a truth within themselves that cannot be faked. This alignment is rare because it requires deep self-honesty and the courage to defy societal conditioning. But it is also liberating, because once you stop outsourcing your power, your validation, your permission to feel, you step into a reality where you are no longer just surviving. You are creating, connecting, and becoming. Repressed desires are not destroyed. They are buried alive, and in the darkness of the unconscious, they grow teeth. What we deny ourselves emotionally, sexually, or psychologically does not vanish. It mutates. Desires that are labeled as inappropriate, dangerous, shameful, or weak are often locked away in the shadow, that hidden part of the psyche where everything we disown collects. But the human mind is not a sealed vault. It leaks. And what we push down with force eventually pushes back with even more force. Repressed desires become internal saboteurs, acting beneath our awareness, driving behaviors, decisions, and even illnesses in ways we struggle to explain. You might think you're in control of your life, but if you haven't confronted your deepest wants, especially the ones you've been taught to fear, you are being steered by invisible hands you don't even realize exist. People often confuse suppression with strength. They believe ignoring a desire makes them disciplined or noble, but repression is not mastery. It's avoidance dressed up as virtue, and what we avoid begins to rule us from the dark. You may notice it in your relationships. Why do you always attract emotionally unavailable partners? Or why do you suddenly sabotage intimacy when it starts to feel too real? You may notice it in your work. Why do you procrastinate on things that matter? Or why do you feel uninspired in spite of external success? These are not random behaviors. They are signs of an inner world that is screaming for your attention, a battlefield between your conscious goals and unconscious resistance. Every time you say, "I don't know why I did that," or "I know better, but I keep doing the same thing," you are witnessing the power of a repressed desire fighting for expression. Much of the modern world is structured around the denial of human instinct. We are taught to be productive, polite, presentable, but not primal. From an early age, we learn which emotions are acceptable and which are not. Anger gets labeled as dangerous, sadness as weakness, lust as sin. So we learn to perform, smiling when we're anxious, staying silent when we're boiling inside, pretending we don't want what we secretly crave. But the psyche does not forget. It stores every unmet need and denied longing like a hidden file, and over time, the weight of those files starts corrupting the entire system. Repression creates internal tension, and that tension demands release. If it doesn't come out through conscious expression, it will come out through unconscious sabotage, addiction, chronic anxiety, destructive relationships, rage explosions, or inexplicable apathy that robs life of color. The tragedy is that many people never recognize the root of their suffering. They treat symptoms, chase distractions, blame others, or overcompensate with control. But the real war is within, and until you look inward, nothing on the outside will bring lasting peace. What you repress, you give power to. What you avoid, you become enslaved by. The desire you refuse to face becomes the obsession you cannot escape. That's why forbidden fantasies haunt your dreams, or why a seemingly innocent interaction can trigger emotional storms that feel disproportionate. Your unconscious is trying to speak, not to destroy you, but to free you. It holds the truth that your ego is too afraid to acknowledge, and truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only medicine that heals at the root. Some of the most damaging effects of repressed desire are subtle, hidden beneath patterns that seem normal. Perfectionism, for example, can be a mask for repressed fear of rejection. Workaholism can hide a desire for validation. Excessive people-pleasing often masks a deep longing to feel desired and significant. Even spiritual bypassing, using lofty ideas to avoid uncomfortable emotions, can be a sophisticated form of repression. We say things like, "Everything happens for a reason," or "I've transcended that," as a way to stay comfortable rather than confront the raw human mess beneath. But healing does not come from denial. It comes from integration, facing the shadow, acknowledging the desire, feeling the pain, and making space for truth. Only then can we begin to act from clarity instead of compulsion. Repressed desires also affect our capacity for intimacy. We project our shame onto others, judging them for the very things we deny in ourselves. We become afraid of being seen too deeply because we are afraid of what we might find if we look within. Vulnerability feels dangerous because it threatens to expose the truth we've tried to bury. And so we build walls. We avoid eye contact, change the subject, laugh things off. But behind those walls is a hunger, to be understood, to be accepted, to be fully alive. That hunger will not go away. It will keep knocking louder and louder until it is finally allowed to breathe. The paradox is that what we repress is often what we most need to reclaim. Desire at its core is not evil or dangerous. It is information. It reveals where your soul is calling you, where your life force wants to flow. When you deny it, you cut yourself off from vitality. But when you explore it with honesty and compassion, you uncover hidden strengths, passions, and truths that have been waiting for recognition. This is not about acting on every impulse. It is about becoming conscious of what drives you, so you can choose with awareness rather than be ruled by compulsion. You don't heal repression by indulging recklessly. You heal it by bringing it into the light, examining it, and integrating it with your higher self. That is the journey from sabotage to sovereignty, from living in reaction to living in creation. True individuation requires integrating sexual instincts because these instincts are not separate from the soul's evolution. They are central to it. Individuation, the process of becoming whole and fully oneself, is not a matter of polishing the ego or perfecting the outer image. It's a descent into the depths of the psyche, where the fragmented, disowned, and often uncomfortable parts of ourselves reside. Among the most powerful of these is our sexual nature. It is the force that touches every corner of the human experience, shaping identity, fueling creativity, and stirring the raw emotions that define what it means to be alive. Yet, in a world that still moralizes, shames, and fears sexuality, many are conditioned to disconnect from it entirely. This disconnection fractures the self, leaving behind a curated version of identity that is safe, acceptable, but profoundly incomplete. Sexual instincts are more than physical urges. They are archetypal energies rooted in the collective unconscious. They carry within them the desire not only for union with another, but also for inner union between the opposites within, the masculine and feminine, the conscious and unconscious, the light and the shadow. When we deny our sexual nature, we deny one of the most primal doorways into our own wholeness. The discomfort we feel around this subject isn't accidental. It's the result of centuries of repression, religious conditioning, and cultural narratives that told us sex is dirty, dangerous, or distracting. But what if the real danger is in never confronting it at all? What if the power we seek in spirituality, art, and even love has been hiding in the very energy we've been taught to fear? In the journey of individuation, sexual instincts serve as a mirror. They reveal what we long for, what we avoid, what triggers us, and what liberates us. The things that arouse us often have deeper meaning than we think. They are symbols of parts of ourselves that want expression. Sometimes what we desire externally is a reflection of what we are missing internally. This isn't just about physical attraction, it's about emotional and psychological needs disguised as longing. Until we bring awareness to these patterns, we project them onto others, chasing fulfillment through relationships that repeat the same wounds. But when we explore our sexual nature with curiosity rather than judgment, we begin to uncover profound insights into who we are, what we've buried, and what we truly need to feel whole. Sexual instincts are not random. They are tied to our life force. They are an extension of the same energy that drives us to create, to pursue meaning, to bond, and to evolve. This is why individuals who are disconnected from their sexual energy often feel disconnected from passion in other areas of life as well. They may feel numb, stuck, or chronically uninspired, not because they lack motivation, but because they have unconsciously shut down the source of their inner fire. On the other hand, those who recklessly indulge their sexual instincts without consciousness may find themselves lost in addiction, using sex to escape rather than to awaken. Integration is the key. It means neither denying nor overindulging, but understanding and embracing this energy as sacred, intelligent, and worthy of reverence. The shadow aspects of sexuality, shame, guilt, fear, taboo, are also part of individuation. They surface not to punish us, but to be examined and healed. Every sexual wound we carry, whether from trauma, repression, or societal messaging, carries with it a lesson. It tells us something about our relationship to vulnerability, power, pleasure, and connection. By facing these wounds, we reclaim pieces of ourselves that have been lost in silence. This inner reconciliation allows us to relate to others from a place of authenticity rather than performance or fear. True intimacy becomes possible only when we are no longer hiding from our own nature. The integration of sexual instincts also helps dissolve false dichotomies, like the belief that one must choose between being spiritual and being sexual, or that desire and discipline cannot coexist. These are illusions born of fragmented thinking. The deeper truth is that spiritual growth demands embodiment. It asks us to come fully into our physical, emotional, and sensual selves, not to escape them. Sexual energy, when brought into consciousness, becomes a powerful force for transformation. It awakens awareness in the body, sharpens intuition, and deepens the emotional intelligence needed to navigate the complexities of life. It invites us into presence, into surrender, and into the alchemy of union, both within and without. There is also a myth that to be whole means to be healed, pure, or morally clean. But wholeness is not about perfection, it's about integration. It means including the messy, the chaotic, the wild, and the uncontrollable aspects of ourselves and finding peace with them. Our sexual instincts are among the most misunderstood and exiled aspects of the human psyche. To bring them back into the fold is to become more fully human. It requires courage to confront what lies beneath the surface, to ask uncomfortable questions, and to resist the urge to simplify something so complex into labels of right or wrong. The path to individuation is not a straight line, it's a spiral inward, touching the same themes again and again at deeper levels of understanding. And sexuality, with all its intensity, beauty, and paradox, is one of those themes. To integrate sexual instincts is to accept that desire is not the enemy of growth, it is the compass pointing toward it. It is a reminder that we are alive, that we are wired for connection, and that the body is not a prison to escape, but a temple to inhabit fully. Only when we embrace this truth can we begin to live from our center, where our power is no longer divided and our soul no longer hides behind a mask. ChatGPT said, "Desire is not a simple want or preference, it is a revelation. It rises from the unconscious not to entertain, but to expose. Beneath the surface of every intense craving lies a story, a history of unmet needs, suppressed emotions, and silent wounds that have been shaping your behavior long before you became aware of them." Desire, especially the ones we don't talk about, the ones we hide, the ones that embarrass us or haunt us, acts like a mirror, reflecting back the fragmented parts of the psyche that have not yet been healed. What we long for with such intensity often points to what we were denied, what we lost, or what we never learned how to hold safely. It's not about the object of the desire, it's about what it symbolizes deep within our emotional structure. And the more powerful the desire, the deeper the wound it echoes. People often mistake desire as purely physical or impulsive, but real desire, the kind that consumes the mind, invades dreams, or triggers shame and confusion, is far more complex. It's a coded language from the unconscious, crafted in symbols and emotional metaphors. You might feel drawn to someone unavailable, not because of who they are, but because they activate the pain of abandonment or the craving to be chosen that you've carried since childhood. You might feel obsessed with being admired, not because you are vain, but because you've spent your life feeling unseen or inadequate. These are not random attractions, they are signposts pointing toward unresolved wounds that long for integration. The mind doesn't forget pain, it buries it. It constructs defenses to protect you from what you're not ready to feel. But buried pain doesn't stay still. It resurfaces in disguise, often wearing the mask of desire. That's why so many people chase love that hurts them, goals that drain them, or fantasies that leave them emptier than before. They think they're pursuing happiness, but they're actually reenacting an emotional script written by past trauma. Until that script is made conscious, desire becomes a loop, a cycle of chasing something that seems external, while the real hunger remains unmet deep inside. It's not the object of desire that needs to change. It's your understanding of what you're actually seeking. We often fear our desires because they feel uncontrollable, irrational, or taboo. But the fear itself is a clue. It tells you where your inner child still hides, afraid of being rejected, punished, or misunderstood. When you trace your desire to its origin, you begin to see not only what you want, but why you want it. And in that moment of clarity, the desire becomes less about gratification and more about transformation. This is the essence of shadow work, making the unconscious conscious, peeling back the layers of impulse to find the wound underneath. You begin to understand that your longing to be touched is also a longing to be emotionally held, that your hunger for power may come from years of feeling powerless, that your desire for attention is really a cry to be truly seen. This does not mean desire is bad or something to be avoided. On the contrary, desire is sacred. It is the soul's way of pointing you toward what is missing, what is broken, or what is ready to evolve. But it must be approached with awareness. Blindly following desire without introspection can lead to self-destruction, but denying desire entirely can lead to depression, numbness, and a fragmented self. The path is not indulgence or repression, it is integration. To stand before your desire without shame, to ask it what it's trying to show you, and to listen with the heart of a healer. Some desires are deeply repetitive. You may notice yourself drawn to the same kind of person, the same kind of dynamic over and over again, no matter how much you consciously try to change. These are trauma loops. unconscious attempts to resolve a past wound by recreating it, hoping for a different outcome. But the healing doesn't come from trying to fix someone else or being chosen by the right person. It comes from breaking the loop entirely by confronting the original wound and giving yourself the love, safety, or recognition you've been outsourcing. That's the moment when desire transforms from addiction to awakening. Even in desire for achievement or recognition, you can find psychological imprints. The drive to be the best, to prove oneself, to never rest, all of this often stems from early experiences of conditional love or worth tied to performance. You're not just chasing success, you're chasing the feeling of being enough. And until you heal the wound of inadequacy, no amount of validation will fill the void. Desire keeps showing you this wound over and over, through frustration, emptiness, and exhaustion. And if you listen closely, you'll realize it's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to wake you up. Desire also reveals the parts of yourself you've disowned. The roles you were told were not acceptable. The wild one, the sensual one, the angry one, the vulnerable one. These energies still live within you, and they make themselves known through fantasy, craving, and attraction. When you deny them, they find their way out through dreams, outbursts, or behaviors you can't explain. But when you welcome them, explore them, and give them a place at the table of your psyche, they become allies rather than saboteurs. Integration brings peace. It turns the mirror of desire from a source of confusion into a map for growth. To look at desire through this lens is to radically reclaim your power. No longer a slave to impulse nor a prisoner of shame, you become a conscious participant in your evolution. You begin to understand that every desire, no matter how intense, irrational, or forbidden, is a message, a clue, a reflection. And if you're brave enough to look past the surface, you may just find the wound you've been trying to heal all along.
Have you ever wondered why there are women who don't need to flaunt, don't need to prove themselves, yet others see them as luxury items, something rare and not easily within reach? While most women are placed in the position of being chosen, a few become the center of desire, admiration, and protection. What creates that difference? The answer does not lie in expensive possessions, nor in glamorous outfits, nor in tricks to keep someone's attention. The real secret lies in the energy you radiate. A feminine energy that makes you rare in the eyes of the world. This is not something you can buy, but something you cultivate from within. The way you show up, the way you keep mystery, the way you cherish each small moment and nurture yourself. In today's video, we will explore 7 secrets of feminine energy through Carl Jung's perspective, principles that help you step out of the circle of one among many choices and become the luxury that anyone who has will treasure. This is not only about love, but also a journey to deeply connect with your true self, to live in wholeness, and to radiate natural magnetism without effort. If the insights in this video have stirred something deep within you, an inner resonance with Carl Jung's vision, and the timeless journey of exploring both shadow and light, leave your mark by sharing this message with others who are also seeking understanding. And don't forget to hit subscribe to continue journeying through the depths of the psyche with Psyche's Labyrinth in the next part of this video. Are you ready to become that invaluable woman? Number 1. Magnetic silence. Without showcasing, you still draw others toward you. There's something fascinating that few notice. Moments of silence often leave a deeper impression than loud words. Have you ever sat in a crowded room where everyone was chatting excitedly and only one woman sat quietly, not competing, not trying to prove herself? Yet her gaze made it impossible for you to look away. That is not empty silence, but a soft, mysterious, deeply magnetic energy. That silence is like a clear lake in the middle of a noisy city. The longer you look, the calmer your heart becomes. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, to stand out, a woman's silence becomes a luxury. Noise doesn't only come from outside. Honking cars, blaring music, endless notifications, but also from within. Worries, comparisons, never-ending inner dialogues. Amid that chaos, someone who can sit down, smile lightly, not rush to interrupt, becomes a rare frequency. People are drawn to that peaceful energy because deep inside, everyone craves a safe harbor to anchor in. I once heard a story about a dinner party in the art world. Everyone dressed glamorously, speaking loudly to attract attention. But in the corner of the room, there was a woman who wasn't wearing the most expensive dress, nor telling dramatic stories. She just listened, occasionally smiled, sometimes asked a very light but sharp question. When the party ended, all the laughter and chatter faded, yet her quiet image lingered hauntingly in people's minds. They remembered her not because she did much, but because she did little, and that little was refined and weighty. Carl Jung once said that when a person integrates their shadow, they no longer need to shout to prove their worth. The shadow, the denied parts, the weaknesses, the insecurities once recognized and embraced turn someone into a solid being. When you are steady inside, you don't need noise outside. Silence becomes the strongest evidence of inner strength. The same goes for love. Many women think to attract a man, they must constantly impress, must laugh and talk endlessly. But the truth is the opposite. Sometimes just sitting next to him saying nothing, your hand lightly on a glass of water, your calm eyes gazing out the window. That moment makes him remember you forever. In that silence he feels safe. A rare feeling in a world that constantly demands he be strong, be armored. Some women worry that silence will be seen as boring, but silence is not the absence of charm. It is a lure without performance. It's like a faint fragrance, unseen yet etched in memory. A man may forget jokes, but he will never forget the peace he felt sitting beside such a woman. Carl Jung emphasized that every person carries chaos and longs for harmony. A silent woman is the embodiment of that harmony. She doesn't need to race with the world because she has found her own rhythm within. And once she finds that rhythm, her silence naturally resonates like a melody others want to hear. Ask yourself, when was the last time you allowed yourself true silence? Not silence from sadness, but silence as full presence with yourself. If you practice pausing, taking a deep breath, not needing to prove anything, you'll realize a soft but lasting strength is growing inside you. Men never forget a woman with this energy, because in their world, pressured and competitive, a woman who knows silence is a rare luxury. He may meet hundreds of lively women, but only one gives him peace, and that is the one who stays longest in his mind. When you understand this, you'll no longer feel the need to rush to impress. For it is your weighted silence, the calm in your eyes that makes you magnetic. And from that silence, you open the next chapter of your feminine journey. Number 2, listening with the soul, making others feel truly understood. If silence is the beginning of magnetism, then listening is the next rhythm that nourishes connection. A silent woman makes a man stop and notice, but her ability to listen with the soul is what makes him open up and stay. Because there is one thing every human, no matter how strong, longs for: to be truly understood. Listening is not just keeping quiet while someone talks. Listening with the soul is being fully present without judgment, without interrupting, without rushing to advise. It's letting the other's story flow through you like a river while you become the still lake reflecting it all. A man who is listened to with the soul feels as if standing before a transparent mirror where both his strength and hidden fears are seen. I once knew a woman working in psychology, but in daily life she never acted like she was analyzing anyone. One day her husband came home weary, eyes heavy. He spoke of fears his project might fail, of feeling not good enough, not worthy. Another might say, "Don't worry, you're great." But she just sat beside him, hand on his shoulder, eyes deep without interrupting. Just a nod, a slow breath, a look that seemed to say, "I see you, I hear you." Minutes later, he cried. Not because his fear vanished, but because for the first time, he had a safe place to lay it down. He didn't need to prove, didn't need to hide. And that was worth more than any comfort. Listening with the soul is exactly that. Not fixing, not racing to respond, but letting the other exist whole. Jung emphasized that people crave not just to be loved, but to be seen and to see someone. You must go beyond the persona they wear in society, into the deeper part where insecurities, wounds, shadows lie. When you listen with the soul, you touch the unconscious, where words are no longer barriers. Only the energy of empathy and love. Many women mistake men as needing advice or solutions, but men are raised to be strong, not to complain. So when they rarely admit fear, what they need is not a fixer, but a witness. A woman who can simply sit there doing nothing but being present is a luxury to them. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. When two souls meet in true listening, both are changed. The man is unburdened. The woman becomes a witness of his depths rarely revealed. That's why a man can meet hundreds of beautiful, smart women, but remember only the one who made him feel heard, seen with her soul. This is true not only in love, but also in friendship. In work, a boss can talk for hours to motivate employees. But sometimes just sitting down, listening to their pressures, keeping eye contact, opening the heart, that alone makes an employee loyal for life. Women are the same. You don't need all the answers, only presence, and that alone is rare. In this noisy world, listening with the soul is a luxury. Most listen to reply, to answer, to tell their own story. But soul listening is listening to understand, to feel, to affirm the other's existence as valuable. That is what men with their ingrained pressure to be strong secretly crave but rarely admit. And when you give them that, you become the only one. After all, men don't remember flowery promises. They remember the moment you sat beside them, eyes glowing with empathy. They remember when you said nothing, but in your silence they found comfort. That is the power of a woman who listens with the soul, not to change his world, but to be the place where his world feels safe to show up. Number 3, keeping mystery, not giving everything away at once, always leaving something to discover. If silence makes a man pause and soul listening makes him stay. Mystery is the lingering fragrance that keeps him searching for you. Humans crave what they can't yet touch. What comes too easily is quickly dismissed as ordinary, while what sparks curiosity becomes long-lasting allure. A luxury woman is not one who gives herself away instantly, but one who knows how to keep undiscovered territories. Mystery is not lying or hiding, but the art of knowing what to reveal and what to preserve. It's like a good book. You can't read it all in one flip, but chapter by chapter is revealed, creating anticipation, fascination. A woman is the same. She doesn't need to tell everything about her childhood or dreams in the first few meetings. She leaves spaces, reasons to return, motives to keep learning. I once witnessed the story of a young woman in New York. She was sweet, friendly, pursued by many men, but one thing made her different. She never rushed to reveal everything. On the first date, when asked about her hobbies, she just smiled. There are things I'll share gradually when you truly want to know. Instead of lengthy explanations, she let her playful eyes speak. Strangely, those busy men kept asking her out, only to discover more fragments each time. She wasn't playing strategy, nor pretending to be cold. She simply kept a part of life for herself, and that made her rare. Carl Jung believed that in the collective unconscious, the feminine archetype is always tied to mystery. Thema represents not only emotions and intuition, but also the spiritual depths men often hide. The woman in a man's mind is not a predictable figure, but a doorway to his inner world. That mystery makes him want to dive deeper, to touch what no one has. Jung called it the evocative archetype. The feminine image never runs out of meaning, always making men feel there's more to explore. In Greek mythology, Phane symbolizes mystery. She was both the daughter of the harvest goddess Demeter and queen of the underworld after marrying Hades. Prophene carried two faces, the light of spring and the darkness of the underworld. That duality made her irresistibly magnetic, tender yet distant, pure yet deep. Phane shows that a woman doesn't need to give all ma. The more she keeps, the more mystical she becomes, captivating both gods and mortals. Men in real life are also drawn to women with panani inside. They don't need you to be perfect, nor to reveal everything. What they want is the feeling of accompanying you on a journey, discovering something new each day. What is given too quickly dies quickly. What is revealed slowly sustains desire. Keeping mystery does not mean shutting down or being cold. It's the awareness that you have a vast inner world and no one deserves to enter all at once. A man needs time, patience, and effort to earn your trust and see you open layer by layer. That journey of waiting and discovery is what binds him deeply. What comes too easy is rarely valued. Jung once said, "There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection." The mysterious woman is one who guards that treasure, not to hide forever, but to save for the right man, the right time. And when that moment comes, what she gives becomes priceless. Not something anyone can have, but only those truly worthy. In the end, a mysterious woman embodies luxury, not easily possessed, yet universally desired. She is not placed as one of many options, but becomes the one etched deep in a man's memory. Because mystery is the delicate yet unbreakable veil that keeps you unique without flaunting, without proving, you still make men endlessly yearn. And when you keep small secrets for yourself, you turn love into a long journey, not a fire that flares up and burns out quickly. Number 4, gratitude and enjoyment. Happiness, energy present in every small detail. Mystery draws men toward you, but the energy of happiness present in small details is what keeps them long-term. A man may be attracted by beauty, by mystery, but he truly bonds with a woman who treasures life, who finds joy in the simplest things. Few realize happiness doesn't lie in having much, but in feeling enough with what you have. A woman who constantly compares and complains radiates scarcity, like an empty vessel always demanding to be filled. In contrast, a woman who smiles at the aroma of hot tea, who looks up at the blue sky and feels calm, she radiates fullness. That is the sign of a luxury item. No one can buy that happiness because it doesn't come from outside, but from inner connection. Carl Jung emphasized that true happiness doesn't come from clinging to externals, but from connecting with the self, the whole inner being. When a woman connects with herself, she no longer worries about what she lacks, no longer chases external standards. She feels enough, and from that enoughness, she becomes a light. A man near such a woman feels safe because he knows he doesn't have to carry the burden of filling her emptiness. On the contrary, he is nourished by her fullness, making life lighter. Imagine a garden full of flowers. It doesn't call anyone in, doesn't need signs. Yet its colors, scents, and vitality make passers-by stop, gaze, and return again and again. A grateful, enjoying woman is the same. She doesn't chase anyone, doesn't beg for love, doesn't need to prove her fullness in small details. A smile at sunrise, calm with a cup of tea, joy in cooking turns her into a luxury garden men can't leave. In love, many women think to keep a man, they must surprise him or sacrifice greatly. But the truth is, what holds a man longest is the peace you radiate when you sit beside him. Simply enjoying gentle music or smiling at rain outside the window. You show him you don't need the world to be perfect, to be happy. And that's something men rarely find. For they are often lost in pressure, in the race for success, in the absence of the present. A man once shared that he'd been in many relationships, but never forgot one memory. A rainy evening sheltering with his lover under a roof. Instead of complaining about wet clothes or traffic jams, she turned her face to the raindrops, laughed and said, "Romantic, isn't it?" In that moment, he felt she gave him another world where happiness didn't depend on circumstance, but came from within. Years later, he still remembered that because it was completely different from other women he'd known. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And when you live in gratitude, you become yourself. Not a lack and copy chasing others, but a whole being finding joy in small details." A woman in this energy is a luxury because she is independent, doesn't need to prove, yet radiates a fullness everyone longs to touch. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat down grateful for something small? Maybe a cool drink on a hot day, a caring message, or simply your healthy body. When you begin to see those things, your energy shifts. And when your energy shifts, so does the world around you. Men are not drawn by what you flaunt, but by what they feel near you. Fullness, gratitude, happiness, present. And from this foundation of gratitude, the feminine journey opens another door. When you are whole and full, you understand the true power of softness, the kind that is gentle but never weak. Number 5, living true to your essence, not acting roles, daring to be seen as you truly are. A woman may attract looks, fascinate with mystery, but only when she dares to remove the mask and show up whole does she become truly rare. because most women are used to acting roles. The perfect girl, the fun lover, the beautiful wife, but the one who dares to live true to say, I too am afraid, I too am wounded, becomes the rarity men struggle to find. Carl Jung said, the persona, the mask we wear to fit society, is necessary for integration, but it is never the whole person. When women live only through the persona, they become replicas of millions, always strong, cheerful, perfect. But when you dare reveal the imperfections, fears, tears, awkward moments, you let others see your true essence. And that truth is the rarest luxury in an age accustomed to pretense. I once knew a woman in media. Her job demanded she always be polished, confident and smiling. To colleagues, she was the company's missionality. But once in a private talk, she shared how she had suffered deep depression after losing a loved one. Instead of hiding, she chose to tell that story at a small gathering. She said, I too was weak. I thought I couldn't survive. But those dark days taught me to cherish the light. That day, no one pied her. Instead, they saw a real human, not just a facade. From then, she was the most trusted, not only for her ability, but for her honesty. Men too, many women think to be loved. They must hide weakness, always act strong and have fun. But men don't stay long with a great actress. But with a woman who lives true in his world, always armored, he longs for a place to drop the armor. When you dare let him see your essence, you silently tell him, you can live true too with me. That safety is what keeps men. Carl Jung showed that the journey from persona to self is the return to true essence. And that is also what makes a woman luxury, not flawless looks, but courage to be real. A woman living true can say, I'm tired today, can cry when needed, can admit fears instead of making men look down. It makes them feel closer and special because most women still try to prove perfection. In history, Princess Diana exemplified the magnetism of living true in the rigid British royal family. Diana did not hesitate to show her vulnerability. She openly spoke of postpartum depression, of marital pain, of loneliness, even in a palace. Many thought that would diminish admiration, but instead, she became the people's princess. Millions of women saw themselves in the truth she dared share. That authenticity made her unforgettable, a luxury the world never forgot. Living true doesn't mean exposing everything, but daring to show real emotions without fear of judgment. A luxury woman can beam with a smile but also say, today I'm fragile. She doesn't need to hide to be loved because she knows her value lies in truth. If you notice, those who leave the deepest mark in your life aren't perfect ones. But those who live true, they dared cry when hurt, laugh when happy, share fears without fear of ridicule. That is luxury energy. In a fake world, truth is rare and priceless. Men may be drawn to grace or beauty, but they only bond long-term with your essence because that's what they can't find elsewhere. When you live true, you become luxury. Not a perfect display piece, but an original rare soul. Number 6, gentle but not weak. Feminine strength lies in softness with resolve. Gentleness is the heart of feminine energy. However, without boundaries, gentleness can become a weakness, leaving you vulnerable to being overwhelmed by others' demands. On the other hand, excessive toughness can make you rigid, turning love into a constant power struggle. The luxury woman strikes a perfect balance, soft like water, yet firm like stone. Carl Jung taught us that the key to individuation, the process of becoming whole, is finding balance between opposites. Femininity is not about being solely soft or solely tough. It's about harmonizing these qualities, creating a powerful yet serene presence. A woman who is gentle yet not weak has learned to integrate both her light and shadow. She knows when to embrace compassion and when to stand firm in her convictions. This balance makes her rare, impossible to overpower, yet without the need to shout to prove her strength. Consider Anna, a successful entrepreneur known for her calm demeanor. In a business meeting, when a partner offered an unfavorable contract, instead of reacting in anger or accepting quietly, she smiled and said, I understand your point, but this doesn't align with my company's values. If this isn't revised, we cannot proceed. Her tone was soft, her voice steady, but her stance was unshakable. In the end, her partner conceded. What stood out was not just the outcome, but the way she maintained her softness while fiercely protecting her values. In love, this quality is just as essential. A gentle but resolute woman can say to her partner, "I understand, but I cannot accept this." It's a light statement, yet it firmly sets a boundary. She affirms her willingness to listen, but never at the expense of her self-respect. This balance makes men feel safe and respected. True feminine strength is not about loud defiance or rebellion. Often it's in the quiet power of a gentle smile, the firm, tender gaze that says no without aggression. This strength teaches men that you cannot be easily controlled, but you don't turn love into a battlefield. You are a rare blend of compassion and principle. Picture a willow tree by the river. When strong winds blow, its branches bend gracefully, but they never snap. They return upright. Its softness is not weakness. It is the secret to surviving the fiercest storms. A rare woman is like the willow, gentle yet possessing an unshakable strength beneath her surface. The most admired women are not always the toughest nor the softest. They are a blend of both. They can offer warmth when needed, but they also know when to say stop with grace. This balance is magnetic, creating an allure that lasts. In a world that still equates gentleness with weakness, daring to live with both softness and resolve is rare. Men may encounter many sweet, kind women, but few will know how to establish boundaries with such gentleness. That's why you're not just another option, you're a luxury. The man who has you knows he's fortunate. Number 7, nurturing energy when you care for yourself and radiate to others. The true secret that makes a woman a luxury is not how much she gives, but how she nurtures herself first and then radiates that energy outward. An empty heart can only give fatigue, while a full one naturally radiates warmth and vitality. Carl Jung spoke of the mother archetype as the source of life, safety, and nurturing. Yet this archetype is not confined to motherhood or family care. It symbolizes a nourishing energy that makes others feel safe, healed, and uplifted. A woman who embodies this energy doesn't sacrifice herself until depleted. Instead, she cares for herself first so that she can give without draining herself. In a society that often teaches women to gain love by giving endlessly, sacrificing themselves, this mindset can lead to being taken for granted. A woman who makes time for herself, whether through a quiet morning, a cup of tea, or simply breathing deeply, becomes rare. She doesn't see self-care as selfishness, but as the foundation from which all love flows. I recall a mother who, exhausted by the demands of work, children, and family, found herself overwhelmed. She was irritable and drained until she realized that by neglecting herself, what she gave to others was only fatigue. She began incorporating self-care, breathing exercises, meditation, gratitude, and allowed herself to rest. Soon she felt more at peace and her children felt safer and more loved. This approach is not just supported by personal experience, but science as well. Research on brain plasticity shows that habits like meditation, yoga, and gratitude boost oxytocin and endorphins, hormones that foster peace and connection. When a woman nurtures herself, she radiates positive energy that others are naturally drawn to. In a world that pressures women to multitask and endure without rest, the ability to nurture oneself becomes a rare and luxurious trait. Many women chase success and love, yet forget the most vital form of self-love, nurturing their inner peace like a garden full of vibrant flowers. A woman who nurtures herself does not seek attention but becomes magnetic through her natural radiance. When she is full, she doesn't need to give warmth, flows effortlessly, making others feel strengthened, safe, and healed. Carl Jung once said, "No single way of living fits all. Nurturing is the same. For one, it's reading another painting, meditating, or walking in nature. The only rule is listening to yourself to refill your inner vessel. When a woman nurtures herself, she becomes a rare gift to the world. Her presence is not just a choice among many, but a luxury. As Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakes? A woman who dares to turn inward to nurture and fill herself awakens a rare light in the world. A woman who understands these 7 secrets of feminine energy is like a work of art shaped by time, depth, and quiet experience. She doesn't need to prove anything. She simply lives true, sets boundaries, nurtures peace, and radiates fullness. She is not one of many options, but a presence that others feel fortunate to encounter. If you feel these secrets resonate with you, share this video with others so they too can reclaim their feminine power. And don't forget to subscribe to Psyche's Labyrinth. Join us on this journey of self-discovery where you will not just become a choice, but a rare, irreplaceable version of yourself. See you in the next video. Most people talk about spiritual awakening like it's the finish line. They think recognizing the light means they've arrived. But what if I told you there's a stage beyond awakening that almost nobody discusses? A stage where you're no longer seeking because you've become what you sought. What if you've already reached it without even knowing? The Sophia stage isn't announced with fireworks or mystical visions. It simply is. And the question isn't whether you can reach it. The question is whether you're already there, living it, breathing it, without the need for anyone to confirm it. This isn't about achieving another spiritual milestone. This is about recognizing what you've already become when no one was watching. Most confuse spiritual awakening with the end of the journey. Basing the light means arriving at the destination. But awakening is just the first breath of a much deeper transformation. What comes after carries no certificates, no external validation, no dramatic revelations. The ancient philosophers called it Sophia, not as knowledge you acquire, but as embodied wisdom flowing through every cell of your body. This state doesn't show itself in what you know, but in how you exist. In this video, you'll discover 8 signs that suggest you've already reached this state. We'll navigate through the insights of Carl Jung, Alan Watts, and Schopenhauer, not as an academic exercise, but as a mirror for what already lives within you. These signs aren't a checklist to tick off. They're resonances, vibrations that either echo in you or remain silent. Then, are you ready to recognize that you might already be where you've always wanted to go? The first shift that points to Sophia is subtle, yet fundamental. Your inner landscape has changed. The old wounds are still there, their scars visible on the topography of your soul, but they no longer bleed. Jung spoke of shadow integration as the central work of the individuation journey. In his analyses, he showed that a person only becomes whole when they stop projecting the dark parts of their psyche outward. In the Sophia stage, this integration is no longer an effort. It has happened. You're no longer fighting yourself. The inner voices that told you for years that you weren't music enough, that you were broken, wrong, have lost their power. Not because you defeated them, well, but because you understood they were part of the chorus that led you to this point. Jung recognized repeatedly in his work with patients that the parts of ourselves we reject most often hold the keys to our wholeness. The shadow isn't the enemy. It's the forgotten brother waiting in the dark for acknowledgement. The wound has become wisdom. It no longer tells a story of victim and perpetrator, but of transformation and wholeness. In this integration lies a power that goes far beyond intellectual understanding. It's a cellular acceptance, a deep yes to everything you are and music have been. Look at your past. Do you still feel the sharp sting of shame, or do you only see the necessary path? The scar differs from the healing that erases. A scar remains as testimony. It says, I was there. I burned. I walked through fire and didn't come out unscathed but whole. There's a deep dignity in accepting your own story without beautifying or cursing it. The ancestral burdens that once seemed to crush you have lost their weight. They're still there, woven into your cellular memory, but they no longer dictate your present. They've become an inner compass, a silent knowing about which patterns you don't need to repeat. You no longer visit these old pains obsessively. They're simply part of your history. Accepted, integrated, transformed. The ghosts that once haunted you have become teachers. They speak in whispers now, not screams. Have you noticed you're no longer afraid of being seen? Not because you've become perfect, but because the idea of perfection has lost its relevance. You exist in radical acceptance of what was, what is, and what will be. This acceptance isn't passive. It's the most active form of presence there is. It's the courage to stand naked before existence without the armor of pretense or the shield of spiritual superiority. The second sign is paradoxical and precisely for that reason so revealing. Your spiritual ego has died. Alan Watts warned emphatically about the subtlest of all traps, the ego disguising itself as spirituality. He observed how seekers build a new self-image that wants to be higher, purer, more awakened than others. This spiritual ego is perhaps the most stubborn form of self-deception because it adorns itself with the noblest intentions. In the Sophia stage, this performance ends. You no longer collect spiritual identities. The labels disappear: awakened, healed, enlightened, conscious. These words have lost their appeal, not because you want to be humble, but because you've recognized they're empty. You're not searching to be someone, you simply are. This simplicity isn't reduction, but liberation. The endless comparisons stop, but you no longer measure your vibration against others. You don't judge who's conscious and who's asleep, who's figured it out, and who's still stumbling in the dark. Every being is exactly where they need to be in their own perfect chaos, in their own necessary development. This recognition brings a deep stillness with it. You can sit with someone who's just beginning their journey and feel no urge to enlighten them. You can watch someone make the same mistakes you made and not interfere. This isn't indifference. It's profound respect for the sacred timing of each soul's unfolding. Your spiritual practices, if they still exist, are no longer obligations. You don't meditate to prove you're disciplined. You don't do yoga to demonstrate your progress. These actions have become natural expressions like breathing or walking. When they happen, they happen. When they don't, that's completely fine too. There's no inner voice condemning you anymore. Why is Sophia so invisible to the spiritual world? Because it offers no show, no dramatic healing experiences, no spectacular awakening stories, no promises of quick transformation. It's quiet, discreet, almost imperceptible. In a world screaming for the extraordinary, the ordinary lived with complete consciousness is the most radical form of being. The third sign manifests not in mind but in flesh. Your body has become the carrier of wisdom. Polyvagal theory developed by Stephen Porres shows how our nervous system shifts between different states: fight, flight, snorts, freeze, or social engagement. In the Sophia stage, your nervous system has learned to regulate itself not through constant external techniques, but through a deeply anchored inner wisdom. Your body has become your oracle. You no longer search outside for signs and confirmation. Truth speaks through your cells, through the tension in your chest, through the expansion in your breath. When something's wrong, you feel it as tightness, as heaviness, as discomfort that needs no words. When something's right, something expands within you, a silent yes rising from the depths of your body. You no longer need rationalization to know what's true. The body already knows, and you've learned to listen. This somatic intelligence is older than the mind, wiser than any thought. Energy flows through you like water finding its way. You don't force states of high vibration. You don't suppress moments of stillness and withdrawal. There's an organic dance between expansion and contraction, thus between giving and receiving, between activity and rest. This rhythm isn't controlled, it's lived. You've stopped trying to maintain a constant state of bliss or enlightenment. You understand that the low notes are as essential to the symphony as the high ones. Depression isn't failure. Anxiety isn't regression. They're weather patterns moving through the landscape of your being, and you've learned to let them pass without identifying with them. Many spiritual seekers use their practices as escape from the body. They transcend upward away from the dirty, painful, unpredictable matter. Sophia is the complete return to conscious embodiment. Spirit and matter are no longer at war. They dance together, two aspects of the same existence united in you. Presence in the body is the most concrete sign of Sophia. It's not about constant transcendental experiences, out-of-body journeys or mystical visions. It's about fully inhabiting every single second of your life, feeling every breath, acknowledging every sensation, permeating every movement with awareness. That's the magic lying in total presence. The fourth sign is often misunderstood. Your solitude has become fullness. Schopenhauer, in his radical honesty, defended existential self-sufficiency. He recognized that true freedom lies in not depending on the external world to feel complete. In the Sophia stage, solitude is no longer a wound to be healed. It's a state of wholeness. You no longer fill holes with connections. Your relationships are conscious choices, not desperate necessities. You love without losing yourself. You connect without annihilating yourself. The love you give comes from abundance, not from lack. That's the difference between neediness and genuine intimacy. Schopenhauer described most human relationships as attempts to fill one's own inner emptiness through the other. But a relationship between two emptinesses only creates greater emptiness. When you come from fullness, however, you don't meet the other as a solution, but as a complement. The relationship becomes a shared dance, not mutual rescue. There's no more rush to find your soul tribe, meet your twin flame, discover your life purpose through others. You're already complete. The connections that come are gifts, not salvations. They enrich what's already rich. They expand what's already vast. You don't need anyone to make you whole because music, you were never broken. This realization fundamentally changes how you relate. You stop using people as mirrors to validate your existence. You stop seeking completion in another's eyes. The loneliness you once feared has revealed itself as the very ground of your freedom. Why does voluntary isolation become sacred? It's not escape from the world, not misanthropy, not withdrawal from fear. It's the recognition that the deepest encounter possible is the encounter with yourself. In the silence of your own company, you find the entire universe. You're not lonely in solitude. You're complete. The intimacy with emptiness. You no longer fear the inner silence, the absence of stimulation, the quiet without purpose, the nothing that contains everything. Emptiness has revealed itself as the womb from which all creativity, all inspiration, all truth is born. You rest in it like a child in its mother's arms. The fifth sign touches the root of human existence. Your will has transformed. Schopenhauer identified the blind will as the unconscious force driving us to suffering through endless desire. This will, this insatiable hunger for more, for different, for better, is the source of our torment. Sophia is the stage where this blind will is recognized, accepted, and transmuted into conscious action. You act without being driven by lack. As your choices are no longer reactions to pain, you're not trying to plug holes or flee from discomfort. Your actions spring from a quiet center, not from a screaming wound. There's a fundamental difference between action from desperation and action from presence. The compulsive search ends. You no longer need to find your life purpose, fulfill your destiny, manifest abundance. You simply live. Life organizes itself around this presence, not because you've become passive, but because you've stopped swimming against the current. You move with it, in it, as it. This doesn't mean you don't have goals or desires. It means your relationship to them has fundamentally shifted. You pursue what calls to you, but you're not enslaved by the outcome. The doing becomes its own reward, and success or failure are just stories you're no longer attached to. Your will becomes expression, not imposition. You create, you love, you work, you move in the world, but without the tension of forcing results. Action becomes dance, not struggle. You give your best and then let go. But the outcome no longer rests in your clenched fists. Why? Acceptance isn't passivity. Sophia doesn't mean giving up on life, but full participation without attachment to the fruits. It's the detached action the Eastern texts have spoken of for millennia. You dance with life without the need to control where the dance leads. The sixth sign concerns your relationship with time itself. Time's tyranny dissolves. Schopenhauer saw time as one of the forms through which the will imprisons us in cycles of anxiety and regret. Past and future are constructs pulling us from the only moment that exists. Now in Sophia, time loses its power over you. You no longer live in the realm of when I achieve this, when I'm there, when I'm finally enough, then I'll find peace. This postponement of completeness to an imaginary future ends. Wholeness is here in this breath, independent of external achievements. You've stopped postponing your life. Schopenhauer called this the folly of the will, always directing us toward the next goal without ever arriving. But in the Sophia stage, you recognize there's never an arrival, only a constant being. Peace isn't at the end of the path, it is the path itself, the end of productive regret. The past is no longer a battlefield of what-if scenarios. You no longer endlessly replay what could have been different. The past is accepted as the only possible path that brought you to this exact point. Every mistake, every pain, every deviation was necessary. You see now that what you once called your worst moments were actually the crucibles that forged who you've become. The breakdown was the breakthrough. The loss was the opening. Oh, the failure was the teaching. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was wrong. It was all exactly as it needed to be. Presence without effort. Being in the present moment is no longer a mindfulness technique you practice. It has become your nature. You don't practice presence, you simply are present. The difference is like learning to swim versus being a fish. The future no longer frightens you, not because you have certainty about what will come, but because you trust your capacity to be whole in any situation. Whatever happens, you know you'll get through it, not by fighting, but by remaining present. This confidence doesn't come from control, but from trust. The seventh sign shows itself in how you relate to others. Your compassion has freed itself from messianism. Jung taught that individuation is a deeply personal responsibility. To every being must find their own way through darkness. Trying to save others robs them of the right to their own journey. In the Sophia stage, you understand this in your bones. You feel deeply without losing yourself in others' pain. Compassion remains intense and genuine, but without the martyrdom of carrying the world's suffering as your personal duty. You recognize you're not the savior, you're a fellow traveler, a witness, a quiet companion. There's a fine line between compassion and pity. Compassion sees another's pain and music holds space. Pity drowns in another's pain and loses itself. In the Sophia stage, you've learned to hold this boundary, not from coldness, but from wisdom. The savior complex dies. You no longer need to fix the people around you. You don't offer unsolicited advice. You don't get frustrated when someone doesn't follow the path you think is right. Everyone has their own rhythm, their own lessons, their own timing. Your respect for others' autonomy is absolute, but you've learned that the greatest disrespect is assuming you know what's best for another soul. You've stopped playing God in other people's lives. This doesn't make you cold or uncaring. It makes you truly present, truly loving, because your love no longer comes with conditions or expectations. You love people exactly as they are, not as who you think they should become. Your greatest gift is compassionate presence. You no longer help through intrusive words or actions. You help by being a calm mirror in which the other can recognize themselves. Your mere presence, calm and centered, becomes an invitation for others to return to their own calm. Why you allow others to suffer, not from cruelty, but from respect for the sacredness of each individual process. You understand that some pains shouldn't be avoided. They must be traversed. Trying to spare someone their necessary pain isn't love. It's interference with the sacred. The eighth and final sign is perhaps the subtlest and simultaneously most powerful. The ordinary becomes sacred. Alan Watts emphasized repeatedly that true spirituality doesn't lie in altered states of consciousness or extraordinary experiences. It lies in recognizing the divine in the trivial. The sacred doesn't hide on mountaintops or in temples. It pulses in every moment of daily life. You no longer seek intense spiritual experiences. You don't need complex rituals, shamanic journeys, ecstatic states to confirm your connection. The sacred reveals itself in washing dishes, in walking, in breathing. The simplest actions carry the same depth as any meditation. The brush of wind against your skin as you hang laundry and the sound of water filling a kettle. The texture of bread as you slice it. These moments, once overlooked as mundane, now pulse with the same presence you once sought in temples and ceremonies. You've stopped chasing peak experiences because you've discovered that every experience is peak when you're fully present to it. Beauty in simple tasks. What was once perceived as mundane now carries the same magnificence as a sunrise. There's no longer a hierarchy between the spiritual and the material. Everything is permeated with the same essence. The morning cup of coffee is as sacred as any ceremony. The water running over your hands as you wash vegetables carries the same presence as a ritual bath. The moment you tie your shoes can be as filled as meditation in a temple. Watts called this the rediscovery of the ordinary as extraordinary. Well, not because things have changed, but because your seeing has changed. You no longer need to prove you're awakened. Your life isn't a stage where you demonstrate evolution. It's simply life fully lived without an audience. The liberation from the need to be seen and understood is perhaps the deepest freedom of all, the death of longing for the extraordinary. You understand the true magic doesn't lie in transcending the human. The magic lies in living it with total awareness and acceptance. The miracle isn't somewhere else. It's here in the simplicity of your next breath. Sophia isn't a goal you've reached. It's a state of being where you've stopped fleeing from where you always were. You haven't won anything, conquered anything, climbed anything. You simply stopped fighting. In this stopping, everything reveals itself. You no longer teach. You radiate. Your presence becomes the teaching. There's no more need to explain, convince, or guide. Whoever needs to feel it feels it. Whoever is ready to hears. Your life itself is the message, quiet and complete. The need to be understood dies. You no longer need the world to validate your journey, acknowledge your evolution, understand your language. You are sufficient unto yourself. This self-sufficiency isn't isolation, but liberation. You're free from others' opinions, free from the need for confirmation. These 8 signs don't make you special. Sophia isn't spiritual superiority, it's radical humility. You're simply another being who stopped fighting against their own nature. You've come home to yourself not because you changed, but because you stopped trying to be someone else. If you've recognized these signs in yourself, it doesn't mean you've achieved something. It means you finally allowed what was always within you to reveal itself without masks. The wisdom was always there, beneath the noise, beneath the seeking, beneath the fear. It patiently waited until you became still enough to hear it. Now, the question isn't whether you've reached Sophia. The question is, are you ready to see yourself as you truly are, without the stories, without the identities, without the endless search for more? Are you ready to simply be? If these words resonate within you, if you recognize yourself in these signs, then I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Not to prove yourself, but to show others they're not alone on this quiet path. Subscribe to this channel if you want to learn more about the depths of the human psyche, about the integration of shadow and light, about living in conscious presence. Because the journey never truly ends. It only deepens, becomes quieter, more truthful. And sometimes we need words to remind us that the greatest wisdom lies in silence. There are moments when you feel the weight of your life pressing against your chest, and you wonder why this existence feels heavier than others seem to carry. Perhaps you have heard those words before, whispered in spiritual circles or written in books that promise understanding. Your soul chose this life, and maybe those words landed like stones in water, sinking into anger or disbelief, because how could anyone choose this kind of suffering? This reaction, this visceral rejection, reveals something profound about the fragmentation between the conscious self you navigate daily and the deeper self that Jung understood as the organizing center of the psyche. When we have survived by constructing our identity around victimhood, when that narrative becomes the last fortress protecting us from complete dissolution, any suggestion of choice feels like betrayal. It threatens the very foundation we have built to make sense of our pain. Yet this defensive response itself points toward a truth we are not yet ready to see. That somewhere beneath the layers of hurt and protective armor, there exists a knowing we have buried for our own survival. What we will explore together goes beyond platitudes about spiritual growth or empty reassurances that everything happens for a reason. We will walk through the psychological landscape where suffering becomes language, where wounds carved into our earliest consciousness shape the architecture of our entire existence. And we will discover why certain souls seem to magnetize difficulties that others somehow avoid, not because they are cursed, but because there exists a purpose in the psyche that transcends our everyday understanding of choice and will. You carry within you a story that began before memory, before language could name what you felt. In those formative years, when your nervous system was still learning what safety meant, certain experiences imprinted themselves onto your developing consciousness with such force that they became foundational truths. A child who experiences abandonment does not think to herself that her caregiver is struggling with their own unableized pain. She concludes something far more devastating and immediate. I am not worthy of love. I am the problem. This becomes not just a belief, but the central organizing principle around which her entire identity constellates. Jung recognized this phenomenon as the formation of complexes, autonomous psychological structures that develop their own gravitational pull within the psyche. The wounded child complex formed in those early experiences of neglect, violence, or emotional absence does not simply disappear when we grow older. It continues to operate beneath conscious awareness, influencing our choices, relationships, and the very situations we find ourselves drawn toward. The ego, desperate to maintain some sense of coherence and control, builds elaborate defenses around these wounds, often spending decades proving the very beliefs formed in childhood that we are unlovable, that we are too much or not enough, that we exist as problems to be solved rather than beings to be embraced. What many spiritual teachings fail to acknowledge is the brutal distinction between fate and calling, between what is imposed upon us and what emerges from a deeper intelligence within. Jung differentiated between fatum, the external destiny that befalls us through circumstances beyond our control, and vocatio, the interior calling that draws us toward our unique path of becoming whole. When we confuse these two concepts, we either sink into toxic guilt, believing we somehow caused our own abuse or abandonment, or we float into spiritual bypassing, using the language of soul contracts to avoid the genuine grief and rage that our wounds deserve. The transmission of suffering across generations operates through channels that words cannot fully capture. You may carry in your body the unprocessed trauma of your grandmother, the rage your father never learned to name, the grief your mother swallowed to survive. These inheritances do not arrive with instruction manuals or conscious memory. They live in your nervous system, in the way your body tenses when someone raises their voice, in the panic that floods you when faced with intimacy, in the exhaustion that seems to have no source in your own immediate life. The family system, unconscious of its own shadow, often selects one member to carry what everyone else refuses to acknowledge. You become the identified patient, the black sheep, the one who feels too much in a family that has learned not to feel at all. This role, assigned before you could consent to it, shapes your earliest understanding of yourself in the world. When everyone around you seems lighter, more capable of joy, more able to move through life without this constant undertow pulling at your legs, you begin to wonder what is fundamentally wrong with you. But what if nothing is wrong? What if your sensitivity, your depth of feeling, your inability to pretend that everything is fine when it is not? What if these are not flaws, but rather the very instruments through which consciousness attempts to wake up within your lineage? There exists within the psyche a mechanism that Freud named repetition compulsion and Jung understood as the unconscious attempt to master what once overwhelmed us. We find ourselves in the same arguments with different people, choosing partners who wound us in familiar ways, creating circumstances that mirror the original abandonment or betrayal. This is not evidence of our stupidity or weakness. It is the psyche's desperate unconscious strategy to finally gain control over what once left us helpless. The child who could not stop her parent from leaving grows into the adult who unconsciously creates situations of abandonment, hoping that this time, maybe this time, she will be able to change the outcome. The paradox is devastating. In trying to heal, we deepen the wound. Perhaps you have noticed how your pain has become a kind of home, a territory where you know all the landmarks, where you feel somehow more real than in moments of peace or joy. There is a strange comfort in familiar suffering, a perverse sense of control in expecting the worst and being proven right. When someone suggests you could live differently, a part of you recoils, not just in disbelief, but in something closer to fear. Because who would you be without your wounds? If you released the story of your suffering, would anything of you remain? This is not weakness or attachment to victimhood. This is the terrified ego. Knowing only itself is defined by injury, unable to imagine existence beyond the boundaries of pain. Jung understood individuation not as a cheerful journey of self-improvement, but as a descent into the very depths we have spent our lives avoiding. The path toward wholeness, toward becoming who we truly are beneath all the adaptations and defenses, requires that we turn and face what we have exiled into shadow. This is not healing in the sense of returning to some imagined state of innocence or eliminating all traces of our suffering. Integration means making conscious what has been split off, bringing into awareness the parts of ourselves we deemed too dangerous, too shameful, too overwhelming to acknowledge. It means sitting with the wounded child still living inside us and hearing her story without trying to fix, spiritualize, or transcend what she endured. Certain experiences in life function as what Jung called enantiodroia, the emergence of the unconscious opposite. When suffering becomes extreme enough, when we are pushed beyond what we believed we could endure, something shifts in the architecture of consciousness itself. The carefully constructed persona, that mask we wear to function in the world, cracks under pressure. The ego, forced to its limits, discovers it is not the center of the psyche after all. In these moments of complete breakdown, there exists the possibility of breakthrough, but only if we stop fighting what is trying to emerge, only if we allow the descent to take us where it needs to go. This is where easy spirituality fails us most completely. To speak of soul choosing and divine purpose while we are still bleeding from wounds that have not been witnessed, still shaking from traumas that have not been validated, is to commit a kind of violence. Before we can understand the deeper intelligence that might organize suffering into meaning, we must first acknowledge the very real damage that has been done to us. We must allow ourselves to feel the full weight of what we have endured without immediately rushing to find the lesson or silver lining. Some things that happened to us should not have happened, period. This truth must be spoken before any other truth can be heard. Yet there is another layer beneath even this necessary validation. Jung wrote of the self, that deeper, organizing center of the psyche that operates according to a logic the ego cannot fully comprehend. The self is not bound by the ego's concerns for comfort, social acceptance, or even survival in the conventional sense. Its aim is wholeness, which often requires the shattering of the partial identities we have constructed. From the perspective of the self, certain experiences, however devastating to the ego, serve a teleological function. They are oriented toward an end that only becomes visible in retrospect, if at all. This is what makes the concept of the soul choosing so dangerous and so potentially transformative. It is not that your infant self chose to be abused or abandoned in any conscious way, but perhaps there exists a level of intelligence deeper than conscious choice, an organizing principle that knows what raw materials are needed for the particular work of consciousness you came here to do. Perhaps your soul, if we can call it that, without falling into New Age reductionism, recognize that only through extreme difficulty would the false structures of ego be broken down enough for something authentic to emerge. Some souls require complete darkness before they can perceive their own light. This is not metaphor but psychological structure. For those who have lived easy lives, protected from harsh realities, the persona can remain intact, the shadow never integrated, the false self mistaken for the true self across an entire lifetime. But you who have been broken open again and again, you do not have that luxury of unconsciousness. Your suffering has forced you to ask questions that comfortable people never have to face. You have been initiated, whether you wanted it or not, into dimensions of human experience that most prefer to deny. But here is where we must be ruthlessly honest about the difference between suffering that transforms and trauma that simply destroys. Not all pain serves growth. Not every difficult experience contains hidden wisdom. Some things break us in ways that do not lead to breakthrough, but to fragmentation, dissociation, the slow extinction of vitality. The spiritual teacher who tells you that you chose your abuse, your rape, your childhood of terror without acknowledging the profound violation of your boundaries, your innocence, your fundamental right to safety, is not teaching wisdom. They are perpetuating harm under the guise of enlightenment. What distinguishes transformative suffering from meaningless cruelty is our relationship to it. When we can hold our pain within a larger context of meaning, when we can perceive our wounds as initiatory rather than merely punitive, something shifts in our capacity to metabolize what has happened to us. This does not mean pretending our abuse was a gift or that our neglect was somehow deserved. It means we stop identifying ourselves solely as victims of random cruelty and begin to sense, however tentatively, that there might be purpose threaded through our biography, even the darkest chapters. You may have spent years, perhaps decades, seeking outside yourself for what could only ever be found within. The perfect relationship that would finally make you feel whole. The career achievement that would prove your worth. The spiritual practice or substance or experience that would fill the void you have carried since before you could name it. But the self that Jung spoke of cannot be found in external accomplishments or relationships, no matter how perfect they appear. It can only be discovered through the terrifying work of turning inward, of meeting yourself in all your fragmented, wounded, shadow-filled complexity and saying yes to what you find there. When we refuse the call of our own depths, when we numb ourselves against the very feelings that are trying to lead us home to ourselves, we do not find peace. We find what Jung called the unlived life, that peculiar state of existing without truly inhabiting our own existence. You know this state intimately. If you have ever felt like you are going through the motions of living while some essential part of you remains locked away, watching from a distance, never quite present, never quite engaged. This is the price of refusing to feel what needs to be felt, of avoiding the confrontation with our own psyche that transformation requires. The unlived life manifests as chronic restlessness, as the sense that something is always missing no matter what you acquire or achieve. It shows up in addictions both to substances and to people as we desperately seek outside ourselves the wholeness that can only come through integration. It appears as psychosomatic illness, the body speaking what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. And if ignored long enough, it becomes a kind of death in life, a progressive loss of vitality, curiosity, and genuine feeling. The soul that is not listened to does not simply go silent. It begins to withdraw its energy from our daily existence, leaving us hollow, automatic, defended against the very aliveness we claim to want. Perhaps you recognize yourself in this description. Perhaps you have spent so long armored against your own vulnerability that you have forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely touched by life. The tragedy is not that you have been wounded. The tragedy is that you have made yourself unreachable even to your own healing, locked in a protective fortress that keeps out not just pain but also joy, connection, and the possibility of genuine transformation. This is what happens when we mistake numbness for peace. When we confuse the absence of feeling with the presence of serenity, there comes a moment, if we are fortunate, when something cracks in our defenses, a loss so profound it cannot be denied. A relationship that mirrors back to us exactly what we have been avoiding in ourselves. A breakdown that strips away all the strategies we have used to avoid feeling the original pain. In these moments, we are given a choice that is not really a choice at all. We can continue running, continue numbing, continue performing a life we do not actually inhabit, or we can turn and finally face what we have been fleeing. We can meet the wounded child still living within us, still waiting to be seen. And we can hear her story without trying to fix, spiritualize, or transcend it. We can simply witness what happened to her, to us, and allow ourselves to grieve what was lost. This is the beginning of genuine integration, not the premature forgiveness that spiritual bypassing demands, not the false transcendence that pretends we can rise above our wounds without first descending into them, but the slow, painful, sacred work of bringing consciousness to what has been split off and denied. When we finally turn toward our pain instead of away from it, when we stop treating our wounds as enemies to be eliminated and begin to understand them as messengers carrying crucial information about our unlived life, the entire relationship to our biography begins to shift. You start to see your history not as a random series of misfortunes, but as a kind of curriculum, however brutal, designed to break down the false structures of ego and reveal something more authentic underneath. The abandonment that taught you to seek approval outside yourself becomes the wound that eventually drives you to discover your own inner authority. The betrayal that shattered your capacity for trust becomes the initiation that teaches you discernment. And the difference between true intimacy and performed connection, the rejection that convinced you that you were fundamentally unlovable, becomes the very threshold through which you must pass to discover that your worth is not contingent on anyone else's recognition. This is not about finding silver linings or pretending that what happened to you was somehow good. It is about refusing to let your wounds be the final word on who you are. It is about extracting from your suffering the very consciousness it was trying to birth in you all along. In Jungian terms, it is the alchemical process of turning lead into gold, of taking the raw, unmetabolized material of trauma and suffering it until it transforms into wisdom, compassion, and a kind of authority that can only come from having traversed the underworld and returned. The child within you who unconsciously said yes to this difficult incarnation, who somehow knew at a level beyond conscious choice that this particular configuration of challenges would be necessary for your soul's work. That child deserves to be honored. Not because the abuse was justified or the neglect was acceptable, but because she was brave enough to take on what she took on. She came into this life willing to feel what others avoid, to carry what others deny, to break open in ways that would either destroy her or transform her completely. And you are still here. That fact alone is evidence of something indestructible within you, something that suffering could wound but not eliminate. When you can look back at your own biography from this perspective, when you can hold both the genuine tragedy of what you endured and the recognition that it has shaped you into someone capable of profound depth and authentic presence, something shifts in your relationship to your own story. The question changes from, "Why did this happen to me?" to what is trying to be born through this experience. You are no longer simply a victim of circumstance, but a participant in a larger process of becoming, one that you did not consciously choose, but that has chosen you nonetheless. This shift in perspective does not make the pain disappear. The memories do not suddenly become bearable or the losses somehow acceptable, but you stop needing them to be different than they are. You stop waiting for an apology that will never come, or an explanation that would satisfy the hurt still living in your body. You begin to understand that healing is not about erasing what happened, but about changing your relationship to it, about bringing consciousness to what was unconscious, about integrating what was split off. Integration means you can hold both the wounded child and the adult you have become in the same awareness without needing one to disappear for the other to exist. You can acknowledge the ways you were genuinely victimized while also recognizing the ways you have participated in your own suffering through unconscious patterns and repetition compulsions. You can feel compassion for yourself without falling into self-pity. You can take responsibility for your healing without taking on blame for your wounding. This is mature spirituality grounded in psychological reality, refusing both the inflation of thinking you consciously chose every detail of your life and the deflation of believing you are merely a helpless victim of cruel fate. The tears that come when this understanding finally lands are different from the tears of pain or rage or grief you have cried before. These are tears of recognition, of finally seeing your own story as coherent rather than random, as meaningful rather than merely tragic. They are tears of gratitude, not for the suffering itself, but for the person you have become through surviving it. They are tears of release, the final letting go of the need for your past to have been different, for your parents to have been different, for you to have been different. In this moment of integration, you discover something unexpected. The very wounds you thought made you unlovable become the source of your deepest capacity for authentic connection. The sensitivity you learn to hide becomes the instrument through which you perceive what others miss. The pain you thought was your greatest weakness reveals itself as your particular form of strength. The specific way consciousness chose to wake up in you. You are not whole despite your wounds. You are whole because you have learned to include them in your understanding of who you are. This is what changes the quality of your presence in the world. People sense something different about you, though they may not be able to name it. You have stopped performing the role of the wounded healer or the enlightened teacher or any other spiritual persona. You have simply become more real, more available, more capable of meeting others in their own pain without needing to fix or save or transcend it. There is a kind of authority that emerges only from having been genuinely broken and somehow reconstituted into something more authentic than what existed before. You no longer need to announce your transformation or prove your growth. Your frequency speaks for itself. The way you listen, the way you allow silence, the way you can sit with discomfort without rushing to resolution, these subtle shifts communicate more than any declaration of healing could. You have developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold tension between opposites without collapsing into one side or the other. You can be both vulnerable and strong, both broken and whole, both wounded and wise. This is not the end of your journey, but a new beginning. Having integrated your personal shadow, you begin to perceive the larger patterns of collective suffering that move through families, cultures, entire lineages. You recognize that the work you have done to bring consciousness to your own wounds does not belong to you alone. When you interrupt unconscious patterns in yourself, you interrupt them for everyone connected to you across time. Your healing ripples backward to your ancestors and forward to generations not yet born. You understand now why certain souls take on more difficult lives, not because they deserve punishment or because the universe is cruel, but because the work of consciousness requires pioneers willing to feel what has been denied, to bring light to what has remained in shadow, to transform through their own suffering the very patterns that have caused suffering across generations. This is not a comfortable truth. It does not remove the genuine injustice of what you endured or make your pain suddenly noble, but it offers a framework for understanding why your life has felt so much heavier than others, why you could never simply coast through existence the way some people seem to do. Your soul, that deeper organizing principle Jung called the self, recognized the work that needed to be done and accepted the cost. Not in a masochistic way, not because suffering is inherently good, but because consciousness evolution requires that someone be willing to descend into the depths, to feel the unfelt, to speak the unspoken, to metabolize what previous generations could not bear to touch. You are that someone not because you are special or chosen in some ego-inflating sense, but because the particular configuration of your psyche, your lineage, your sensitivities made you capable of this specific work. And now, having done the brutal labor of integration, you carry within you something that cannot be taught through words alone. You have earned the right to speak about suffering not from theory, but from intimate knowledge. Your compassion has been forged in fire rather than adopted as spiritual performance. Your wisdom comes not from books, but from the lived experience of having died to your false self, and discovered what remains when all the defenses fall away. This is the authority of the genuinely transformed, and it cannot be faked. So when someone else comes to you carrying their unbearable pain, wondering why their life feels so impossibly difficult, you do not rush to comfort them with platitudes about soul contracts or divine purpose. You sit with them in the not knowing. You validate the genuine tragedy of what they have endured. And then when the time is right, when they have been truly seen in their suffering, you whisper the possibility that perhaps this weight they carry might also be the very instrument through which their consciousness was meant to wake up. Not because they deserved it, not because it was good, but because their soul, for reasons the ego may never fully understand, was willing to take this on. You tell them what no one told you when you needed it most, that they are not broken even though they feel shattered, that they are not too much or not enough, even though that is what the world has made them believe, that their sensitivity, their depth, their inability to pretend everything is fine when it is not, these are not flaws, but the very signs of a soul attempting to become conscious in a world that mostly prefers to sleep. You tell them that the journey ahead is difficult, that integration requires walking back through the very fires they have been trying to escape, but that on the other side of that descent, they will discover a kind of freedom they cannot yet imagine. And you mean it because you have walked that path yourself. You know what it costs and what it yields. You understand that true transformation cannot be purchased with positive thinking or manifested through visualization. It requires the courage to feel everything you have been taught not to feel, to remember what you were forced to forget, to become intimate with the very pain you have spent your life fleeing. This is not a path for those seeking comfort or easy answers, but for those who cannot help but ask the deepest questions, who cannot be satisfied with surface explanations, who feel called to something more authentic than the life they are currently living. This path becomes not a choice but a necessity. The tears you are crying now, or the tears that will come when these words finally land in the depth of your being, those tears are sacred. They are the water that washes clean the wounds you have carried in secret for so long. They are the first real sign that something in you is ready to release its grip on the old story and allow a new understanding to emerge. Let them fall. Do not rush past this moment in your eagerness to feel better or to already be healed. Grief is not an obstacle to transformation. It is the very doorway through which transformation arrives. Your soul did choose this life in ways we can barely articulate and should not attempt to fully explain. Not because suffering is good or because you needed to be punished or tested, but because there was work to be done at a depth that only extreme challenge could reach. Because consciousness needed to wake up in your particular corner of existence, and that awakening required the shattering of all the pretty illusions, all the false securities, all the ways you might have remained comfortably asleep. You were chosen for this work, not by a punishing deity, but by the deepest intelligence within your own being, the self that knows what the ego cannot yet comprehend. And now you know. The reason your life has been so difficult will not necessarily make you cry with sorrow, though it might more likely it will make you cry with recognition, with the relief of finally understanding that your struggle has not been meaningless, that your pain has not been in vain, that you have been engaged all along in the most sacred work there is, becoming conscious, becoming whole, becoming genuinely yourself beneath all the layers of adaptation and defense. This is what your soul chose. This is what your life has been preparing you for, and you are ready, or you will be, to meet it. If these words have stirred something in you that has long been sleeping, if you recognize your own story in this exploration of suffering and transformation, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and continue this journey with us. Share in the comments what moment of recognition struck you most deeply, what aspect of your own difficult life you are beginning to see through new eyes. Your story matters. Your awakening contributes to the collective healing we are all participating in, consciously or not. This conversation does not end here. It is only beginning, and your voice is part of what makes it real. There is a weight you carry that has no name, a silence that lives between you and the world, and it has been there for as long as you can remember. You walk through rooms full of laughter, yet something inside you remains untouched, unreached. The loneliness is not about being alone. It is about being surrounded and still feeling invisible, like carrying a language no one else speaks. Perhaps you have wondered if this distance is your fault, if you are somehow broken in ways you cannot articulate. But what if this feeling is not a flaw at all? What if it is a sign of something far more profound? Jung once explored a truth that many find uncomfortable. The deeper you journey into yourself, the fewer companions you will find on the path. This is not punishment. It is the natural consequence of a soul that has begun to awaken while the world around it still sleeps. And if you have always felt like you do not belong, even among those who claim to love you, there is a reason written into the very structure of your psyche. A reason that changes everything once you understand it. What follows is not comfort, it is recognition. And recognition, when it comes to old souls, is the rarest gift of all. You have spent years trying to bridge the gap between who you are and who others seem to need you to be. The exhaustion does not come from lack of effort. It comes from the realization that no matter how much you adjust, something essential remains untranslatable. You speak and others hear words, but the meaning beneath those words evaporates in the space between you. This is not miscommunication, it is a frequency mismatch so fundamental that no amount of explanation can resolve it. Jung called this the process of individuation, the becoming of who you truly are separate from the collective unconscious that governs most human behavior. But individuation is not a gentle unfolding, it is an exile. A voluntary one, yes, but an exile nonetheless. The more you peel back the layers of conditioning, the more you step out of the rhythms that bind others together in unconscious agreement. You stop laughing at jokes that are not funny. You stop pretending to care about conversations that lead nowhere. You stop performing the small rituals of belonging that require you to abandon fragments of your truth. And in doing so, you become incompatible with the machinery of superficial connection. Most people do not want depth. They want familiarity. They want the comfort of predictable emotional exchanges that do not require them to question anything about themselves. Your presence disrupts that comfort, not because you are difficult, but because you are real. And reality, when it enters a room full of carefully maintained illusions, is always unsettling. Do you see it now? The reason you have so few friends is not that you lack value. It is that you carry a kind of value the world has not been taught to recognize. Jung understood that consciousness comes at a cost. The more aware you become of your own inner landscape, the more you see the unconsciousness in others, and they feel it. They sense that you are no longer playing the game, even if they cannot articulate why that bothers them. So they withdraw not out of malice but out of self-preservation, because being near someone who has stopped hiding forces them to confront the fact that they are still hiding, and most are not ready for that confrontation. There is a mechanism at work here that Jung called projection. When people look at you, they do not see you as you are. They see a mirror reflecting back the parts of themselves they have rejected, denied, or buried. Your silence becomes their judgment. Your contentment in solitude becomes their accusation. Your refusal to fill empty space with empty words becomes a spotlight on their own inner void. None of this is conscious. They do not wake up and decide to reject you. They simply feel uncomfortable, and discomfort seeks distance, so they drift away and you are left wondering what you did wrong. But you did nothing wrong. You simply stopped participating in the collective agreement to remain asleep. Have you noticed how exhausting it is to be around people who need you to be smaller? How draining it is to dim your light so others do not feel threatened by it? This is the burden of the old soul, not the weight of wisdom itself, but the weight of carrying that wisdom in a world that punishes you for possessing it. Jung spoke of the archetype of the hermit, the solitary figure who withdraws not out of bitterness but out of necessity. The hermit knows that certain truths can only be understood in solitude, that certain transformations can only occur when you stop giving your energy to connections that deplete rather than nourish. Solitude is not loneliness. Solitude is the space where your soul can breathe without apologizing for taking up room. And yet the question lingers, why does it have to be this way? Why must depth come at the price of connection? The answer lies in the nature of consciousness itself. Awareness is not evenly distributed. Most people live their entire lives without ever questioning the stories they were told about who they are. They inherit beliefs, adopt behaviors, and move through the world in patterns set by generations before them. There is no judgment in this. It is simply the default state of human existence. But you are not living in the default state. Something inside you woke up perhaps long before you had the language to describe it. And once that awakening begins, there is no going back. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you have come to understand, and this creates a gap between you and those who are still dreaming. Jung believed that every soul carries within it layers of the collective unconscious, a reservoir of memories, symbols, and archetypal patterns shared by all of humanity. But old souls access this reservoir differently. You do not just live your own life, you carry echoes of lives that came before, patterns that repeat across generations, wisdom that has no logical source but feels undeniably true. This is why you sometimes know things you have no reason to know, why you feel grief for losses you never experienced, why you look at the world and see cycles others cannot perceive. You are not imagining this. You are tapped into something older than your individual existence. And that connection, profound as it is, sets you apart. Because most people are not living on that level. They are focused on survival, on social validation, on the immediate concerns of their personal narrative. They do not have the bandwidth to meet you where you are. And so you remain alone in a knowing that cannot be shared. But here is where the story shifts, where the ache of isolation begins to transform into something else. Because once you stop seeking validation from a world that cannot give it, once you stop trying to force connections that were never meant to sustain you, you begin to discover a different kind of companionship. Not with many, but with the few who recognize you. Not because they understand every word you say, but because they carry the same frequency. These are not friendships built on shared hobbies or convenient proximity. These are soul recognitions. Rare, yes, but when they happen, they are unmistakable. Jung called this synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence that occurs when inner and outer realities align. And for old souls, true friendship is always a form of synchronicity. It cannot be manufactured, it can only be allowed. Think about the people you have lost along the way, the friendships that faded, the connections that felt promising but ultimately hollow. You mourned them, perhaps. You wondered what you could have done differently. But the truth is simpler and harder than that. They were never meant to stay, not because they were bad people, but because they were not your people. And the sooner you accept that most human beings will never understand you, the sooner you can stop wasting energy trying to make them. This is not bitterness, it is liberation. The liberation that comes from realizing that your worth is not determined by how many people choose to stay in your life. Your worth is inherent, unchanging, and entirely independent of external validation. There is something else Jung observed, something that cuts to the core of why old souls struggle in social spaces. He called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject and repress because they do not fit the image we want to present to the world. But here is the paradox. Old souls have often done significant shadow work. You have looked at your darkness, acknowledged your flaws, integrated the parts of yourself that others keep hidden, and this makes you dangerous, not in a violent sense, but in a psychological one, because when you are comfortable with your own shadow, you stop projecting it onto others. You stop needing enemies to carry your disowned pain. You stop participating in the unconscious games of blame and victimhood that most relationships are built on. And this makes people uncomfortable because if you are not playing the game, you are holding up a mirror to the fact that they still are. So they reject you, not openly, but subtly. Invitations stop coming. Conversations grow shallow. Distance expands without explanation. And you are left wondering if you imagined the closeness you thought was there. But you did not imagine it. It was real for a time until your growth outpaced their willingness to grow with you. And this is the hardest truth to accept, that love, in the conventional sense, is not always enough. That even people who care about you will choose comfort over depth. That your evolution will cost you relationships you thought were permanent. Jung did not promise that individuation would make you popular. He promised that it would make you whole, and wholeness by its very nature cannot conform to the fragmented expectations of the unconscious collective. Does this mean you are destined to walk alone forever? No. But it does mean you must redefine what companionship looks like. It means you stop measuring the richness of your life by the number of people in it. It means you learn to distinguish between loneliness and sacred solitude. Loneliness is the ache of wanting connection that is not there. Sacred solitude is the peace of being so aligned with your own essence that external validation becomes irrelevant. And once you cross that threshold, something miraculous happens. You stop attracting people who need you to be less. You start encountering souls who meet you as you are. Not because you went searching for them, but because your vibration changed. You stopped broadcasting need and started emanating presence. And presence, true presence, is magnetic in ways that neediness never can be. Consider how you feel in crowds versus how you feel in silence. The exhaustion that comes from social gatherings is not just about being introverted. It is about the constant energetic adjustment you must make to meet others where they are, knowing they will not make the same effort to meet you. You listen to conversations about nothing, smile at jokes that miss the mark, nod along to complaints that circle endlessly without resolution, and all the while something in you is screaming for substance, for meaning, for a single exchange that acknowledges the depth of what it means to be alive. But those exchanges are rare, so rare that when they do happen, you remember them for years. You hold on to them like precious stones, evidence that somewhere, somehow, genuine connection is possible. Jung understood this hunger for authentic relating. He saw how most human interaction operates on the level of persona, the mask we wear to navigate social expectations. The persona is not inherently false, but it is partial. It shows only what is safe, acceptable, easily digestible, and for most people, this is enough. They build entire lives on persona-to-persona exchanges, never daring to venture deeper. But old souls cannot sustain themselves on this diet. You need soul-to-soul contact. You need to be met in the raw, unpolished places where your actual humanity lives. And when you cannot find that, when every interaction feels like a performance you did not audition for, the loneliness becomes unbearable. Not because you are lacking connection, but because you are drowning in false connection. And false connection is worse than no connection at all. This is why you have learned to protect your energy so carefully. Why you say no to invitations that once you would have forced yourself to attend. Why you have become selective, perhaps even guarded about who gets access to your inner world. People mistake this for coldness, for aloofness, for thinking you are better than everyone else. But it is not superiority, it is survival. You have given too much of yourself to people who could not hold what you offered. You have opened your heart to those who treated your vulnerability as a burden. You have shared your depths with those who preferred your shallows. And each time you have paid the price in exhaustion, in disappointment, in the slow erosion of trust. So now you guard the gate, not because you do not want connection, but because you have learned the difference between connection that nourishes and connection that depletes, and you refuse to settle for depletion ever again. Jung spent much of his life exploring the concept of the self, the totality of who you are beyond the ego's narrow concerns, and he discovered that the journey toward the self is inherently solitary. Not because you are incapable of connection, but because no one else can walk that path for you. No one else can do your inner work. No one else can face your demons or claim your wholeness. This is your journey and yours alone. And the old soul knows this at a bone-deep level. You do not expect others to complete you because you understand that you were never incomplete. You do not need someone to make you whole because you are already whole. And this self-sufficiency, this quiet sovereignty, is both your greatest strength and the reason why so many people cannot handle being around you, because you remind them of what they have not yet claimed in themselves. But let us speak plainly about the grief, because it is real, the grief of watching friendships dissolve, the grief of being misunderstood, of being labeled difficult or cold or too intense when you are simply being honest. The grief of knowing that you will never have the easy camaraderie that others seem to enjoy, the casual closeness that requires no depth. This grief is valid. It deserves to be acknowledged, not bypassed with spiritual platitudes. Yes, you are on a meaningful path. Yes, your solitude serves a purpose. But that does not erase the longing for someone who truly sees you. And Jung would not ask you to pretend that longing does not exist. He would ask you to sit with it, to let it carve you open, to allow it to become the very thing that deepens your capacity for truth. Because grief, when it is honored, transforms into wisdom. And wisdom, when it is embodied, becomes a light that others can follow, even from a distance. There is a particular kind of mourning that comes with being an old soul. It is not the mourning of what was, but the mourning of what could have been. The friendships that might have flourished if only the other person had been willing to grow alongside you. The connections that showed promise but withered when faced with your refusal to stay small. You carry a cemetery of relationships in your heart. Each one a reminder that love, however genuine, is not always enough to bridge the gap between different levels of consciousness. And this is perhaps the most painful realization of all, that you can care deeply for someone and still be incompatible with them. That affection does not automatically create the capacity for depth. that wanting to be understood and actually being understood are two entirely different things. Jung wrote extensively about the tension between the individual and the collective. He saw how the collective demands conformity, how it punishes those who deviate from the unspoken rules of unconscious participation. And old souls, by their very nature, are deviants not in behavior necessarily, but in consciousness. You do not buy into the narratives that keep most people asleep. You do not find comfort in the same distractions. You do not seek happiness in the places where happiness is supposed to be found. And this makes you a threat, not because you judge others, but because your mere existence poses a question. If you can live differently, if you can find meaning outside the prescribed paths, then what does that say about everyone who has not dared to do the same? The collective does not want to answer that question, so it isolates those who embody it. And you become the outlier, the one who does not fit, the one who reminds others of possibilities they are not ready to face. This isolation is compounded by the fact that old souls often carry an acute awareness of suffering, not just your own, but the suffering woven into the fabric of human existence. You feel the weight of the world in ways that others do not. You see the cycles of pain repeating across generations. You recognize the masks people wear to hide their wounds. And this awareness, while it makes you compassionate, also makes you heavy. People do not always want to be around someone who sees too much. They want lightness, ease, the illusion that everything is fine, and you cannot give them that illusion because you stopped believing in it long ago. So they drift toward those who can still pretend, who can still maintain the fantasy of normally, and you are left with your clarity, which is both a blessing and a curse. So what do you do with this knowledge? How do you live as an old soul in a world that does not recognize what you carry? You stop apologizing. You stop shrinking. You stop pretending that your depth is a burden when it is actually your gift. You allow yourself to be exactly as you are, knowing that the right people will find you, not in spite of your intensity, but because of it. You build a life that does not depend on constant social validation. There are doors that refuse to open, and you stand before them, confused, frustrated, perhaps even broken. You push, you plead, you try to understand why something that felt so right now feels like a wall built by invisible hands. What if I told you that the universe didn't close that door to punish you, but to guard something far more sacred, the frequency of your own essence? In the silence that follows rejection, there lives a wisdom you haven't yet learned to hear. This isn't about consolation or empty spiritual platitudes. This is about understanding why your body knew before your mind did, why exhaustion crept into your bones when you were near them, why clarity only returned in their absence. The universe removed them not because you were unworthy of love, but because they were incompatible with the wholeness you're meant to embody. And today, we're going to explore why that removal was the most profound act of protection you could have received. We're going to journey through the hidden mechanisms that made you believe you needed what was actually depleting you. Through the ancestral patterns that whispered in your blood, telling you that suffering equals devotion. Through the psychological structures that Carl Jung mapped with precision, showing us how we magnetize toward what mirrors our unhealed wounds. By the end, you'll understand that gratitude for what left isn't weakness. It's the ultimate reclamation of your energetic sovereignty. You felt it, didn't you? That magnetic pull towards someone who, in retrospect, consistently dimmed your inner light. It wasn't love you were feeling in those moments of intense attraction. It was recognition, not the recognition of a soulmate, but the recognition of a familiar pain. Your psyche, in its unconscious wisdom, identified in them the exact frequency of an unresolved wound and mistook that resonance for destiny. This is what Jung called the projection of the shadow. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the parts of ourselves we've exiled, now appearing externally in another human form. The universe operates through a language older than words. Synchronicity, as Jung described it, isn't magic or mystical intervention. It's the meaningful coincidence that occurs when our inner psychological state aligns with external events. When a door closes, when a person is removed from your path, despite your desperate attempts to hold on, you're not witnessing cruelty. You're witnessing your own unconscious self protecting the integrity of your individuation process. The self, that totality of your being, both conscious and unconscious, knows which connections serve your wholeness and which ones fragment it. Why then do we resist so fiercely what's actually saving us? Because the ego prefers the known agony to the unknown void. There's a strange comfort in familiar pain. It asks nothing new of you. It doesn't demand growth or transformation. It simply repeats. Like a song you've heard since childhood, played by hands that aren't yours but feel like home. Your mother's unavailability, your father's emotional absence. The blueprint was drawn long before you met them, and they simply walked into a role your psyche had been casting for decades. This is the cruel efficiency of the maternal or paternal complex. These autonomous structures within your psyche operate like magnets, pulling you toward people who will recreate the original wound with stunning precision. You think you're choosing freely, but you're actually obeying an unconscious script written in your earliest years. The person who lowers your frequency isn't a random accident. They're a messenger from your inner child, still waiting at that door, still hoping this time the parent will turn around and see them. But here's what that child doesn't yet understand. You cannot heal the past by reenacting it with different actors. The wound doesn't close because you finally find someone willing to play the role correctly. It closes when you stop casting the role altogether. Notice what happens in your body when you're near someone who depletes your energy. The tightness in your chest, the fog that descends over your thoughts, the way your intuition goes offline as if a vital connection has been severed. This isn't psychosomatic drama. This is your organism responding to a genuine threat to your psychic integrity. Frequency, in Jungian terms, translates to coherence between your conscious values and your unconscious needs. When someone lowers your frequency, they're creating dissonance. They're asking you to betray yourself in small, continuous ways until you no longer recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror. Your body is wiser than your rationalization. It knows when presence feels like absence, when passion feels like panic, when intensity is just chaos dressed in romantic language. The exhaustion you feel isn't because you're not trying hard enough. It's because you're trying to maintain a connection that your deeper self has already rejected. The life force, what Jung called libido, the psychic energy that animates your existence, cannot flow freely in relationships built on fragmentation. It stagnates. It turns inward. It begins to consume itself, and this is where the universe intervenes. Not through divine decree, but through the natural intelligence of your own psyche reaching its limit. Do you remember the first time you felt relief in their absence? That shameful secret moment when you realized you could breathe again. That wasn't failure. That was truth. Your nervous system finally recalibrating to its natural state. The static cleared. The signal returned. You didn't lose a connection. You regained one. The connection to yourself. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about the invisible cords that bind you to patterns you didn't choose. Ancestral trauma doesn't politely stay in the past. It lives in your cells, in your unconscious expectations, in the way you've learned to equate love with struggle. Somewhere in your lineage, someone normalized chaos as intimacy. Someone taught the generations that followed that peace is boring, that real love hurts, that devotion means enduring what diminishes you. You inherited this belief like you inherited your eye color, and now here you are gravitating toward people who confirm it. This isn't about blame. Your ancestors did the best they could with the consciousness they had. But you, right now in this moment, have the opportunity they didn't. You can see the pattern. You can name it. You can choose to be the one who breaks the chain. This is what Jung meant by individuation. It's not self-improvement. It's not becoming a better version of the self your family expects you to be. It's the courageous act of becoming who you actually are beneath the layers of inherited pain and learned survival strategies. And sometimes that process requires the removal of people who can only love the wounded version of you. The one who stays small, who needs them, who never questions the script. When the universe removes someone from your path, it's responding to a prayer you didn't know you were praying. Yourself, that deep center of your being, has been whispering for wholeness. It's been asking for alignment, and it finally got loud enough to move the external world in response. This is teology, the purposeful movement of the psyche toward its own completion. You're not being punished, you're being guided. But guidance feels like loss when you're still attached to the illusion. And here's the hardest part. The person who was removed might not have been fundamentally bad. They might have been kind in moments, generous in ways, even loving according to their capacity. But their frequency and yours were fundamentally incompatible. Not because one is higher or lower, better or worse, but because the paths your souls need to walk diverge. And walking someone else's path while pretending it's yours will only lead you further from your essence. You mourn not just the person, but the version of yourself that needed them. The one who believed she wasn't enough alone. The one who outsourced his worth to someone else's validation. The one who thought peace was too quiet, too. That version of you is dying, and that death is sacred. It's making room for the self that doesn't fragment to fit into spaces too small for your spirit. Projection is a strange and powerful thing. When you see someone and feel that overwhelming pull, you're often seeing your own rejected qualities mirrored back to you. The shadow in Jung's framework contains everything you've disowned about yourself. The anger you were taught was unacceptable. The wildness that was shamed, the neediness that was punished, all of it lives in the unconscious waiting. And when someone embodies those qualities, you don't just want them. You want the reunion with the parts of yourself you lost along the way. But here's the distortion. You cannot integrate your shadow by merging with someone who carries it. Integration happens internally. It happens when you turn toward yourself with the same intensity you've been directing outward. When you stop searching for completion in another person and start excavating the gold buried in your own psychic depths. The person who lowered your frequency was never your answer. They were your mirror, and the universe removed the mirror when you were ready. Whether you felt ready or not, to do the work of looking directly at yourself. This is why their absence feels so disorienting. You're being forced to confront the emptiness you are filling with their presence, and that emptiness isn't a flaw, it's a doorway. It's the space where your authentic self has been waiting, patient and whole, for you to stop running. Let's talk about frequency as integrity, not in the moralistic sense, but in the structural sense. Integrity means wholeness, undivided. When your frequency is high, it means there's alignment between what you say, what you do, and who you actually are beneath the performance. It means your conscious choices reflect your unconscious values. It means you're not living in constant betrayal of your own knowing. People who lower your frequency aren't necessarily malicious, but their presence demands compromise of this integrity. They ask you to silence your intuition, to rationalize what your body rejects, to make yourself smaller so they can remain comfortable. And your psyche will only tolerate that dissonance for so long before it starts screaming. First quietly, through anxiety, through restlessness, through dreams you can't quite remember, but that leave you unsettled. Then, louder through illness, through crisis, through the complete collapse of the life you were trying to force into shape. The universe didn't remove them. Yourself did. It used the universe as its hands. You know what's radical? Trusting that. Trusting that the intelligence moving through your life has your wholeness as its agenda. Not your comfort, not your ego's preferences. Your wholeness. And wholeness sometimes looks like loss. It looks like standing alone in a room that used to hold two. It looks like silence where there used to be noise. It looks like stillness where there used to be chaos. And your ego, terrified of the unfamiliar, will tell you this is wrong, that you should fight harder, compromise more, shrink further. But yourself knows better. It knows that the right people don't require you to abandon yourself. They don't lower your frequency because their presence doesn't create dissonance. They resonate not perfectly because no human relationship is without friction, but fundamentally in the ways that matter, in the ways that allow both of you to expand rather than contract. The people who needed to leave left, and the space they left behind isn't punishment. It's preparation. It's the clearing required before something real can take root. But you have to stop trying to fill it prematurely. You have to let it be empty long enough to discover that emptiness isn't the enemy. Emptiness is the canvas. And you've been given the extraordinary opportunity to paint something true. Here's what no one tells you about gratitude. It's not about pretending the pain didn't hurt. It's not toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing. Gratitude in this context is the profound recognition that your frequency, your essence, your energetic truth is non-negotiable. It's saying, I value my wholeness more than I value being chosen by someone who can't honor it. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect born from hard-won wisdom. When you can look back at the closed door and say, thank you, not through gritted teeth, but through genuine understanding, you've completed a cycle. You've moved from victim to author, from passenger to pilot. You've reclaimed the power you handed over every time you chose their presence over your peace. And that reclamation changes everything. It changes what you'll accept going forward. It changes the frequency you emit. It changes who and what you magnetize into your life. The loneliness you feel right now isn't permanent. It's transitional. It's the loneliness of someone who's outgrown the old paradigm but hasn't yet fully stepped into the new one. You're between worlds, between the self who needed external validation and the self who generates it internally, between the wounded child seeking reparation and the individuated adult who understands that no one is coming to save you because you were never broken to begin with. This in-between space is sacred. Don't rush through it. Don't numb it with distractions or fill it with the next person who shows interest. Sit in it. Let it recalibrate you. Let the silence teach you what the noise was covering. Let the solitude show you that you're not actually alone when you're in your own company. You've just been taught to believe that being alone means being abandoned. It doesn't. It means being whole enough to exist without fragmentation. Your ancestors couldn't do this work. They were too busy surviving. They passed their unprocessed trauma down to you, not out of malice, but out of necessity. You have the luxury of consciousness. They didn't. You have access to tools, to language, to frameworks like Jung's that help you make sense of the chaos. And with that access comes responsibility, not to fix everything, not to become perfect, but to see the pattern and choose differently, to be the one who says this ends with me. When you break an ancestral pattern, you're not just freeing yourself, you're liberating everyone who comes after you, your children, if you have them, your nieces, your nephews, the generations not yet born who won't have to carry the weight of a wound you chose to heal. That's the gift the universe gave you when it removed the person who kept you tethered to the past. It gave you the chance to step into a future unmarred by cycles you didn't create, but have the power to end. And here's the final truth, the one that holds everything together. Your frequency isn't just about you, it's your contribution to the collective. When you operate from fragmentation, from depletion, from the energy of someone who's betrayed their own knowing, you add to the noise. When you operate from integrity, from alignment, from the quiet power of someone who's chosen themselves, you become a beacon, not in a grandiose way, just in a true way. People feel it. They recognize, often unconsciously, that you're not available for dynamics that diminish, and that recognition shifts the field around you. The universe removed them to protect your energy, yes, but also to protect the energy you're meant to offer the world. You can't do that from a depleted state. You can't shine from a dimmed frequency. You can't guide others if you're lost in patterns that keep you small. Their removal was an act of restoration, not just of you, but of your purpose, of the reason your soul incarnated into this specific life with these specific challenges. You were always meant to do this work, to face this pain, to choose wholeness over comfort. And now you have. So what now? You let yourself grieve fully. You honor what was even as you release it. You stop asking why it happened and start asking what it revealed. What did their presence show you about yourself? What did their absence teach you? What are you no longer willing to tolerate? What new boundaries are you ready to embody? These aren't rhetorical questions, they're the map forward. You reclaim your solitude as a gift, not a sentence. You learn to sit with yourself without distraction, without apology, without the need to fill every silence with noise. You discover that the peace you feel alone is more nourishing than the passion you felt with someone who couldn't hold your wholeness. You understand finally that you don't need to be smaller to be loved. You need to be yourself. And anyone who requires your diminishment isn't offering love. They're offering a transaction, and you're no longer for sale. There's a concept in Jungian psychology called the transcendent function. It's the psyche's capacity to hold opposing tensions and birth something new from their synthesis. Right now, you're living that function. You're holding the tension between grief and gratitude, between longing and liberation, between the self you were and the self you're becoming. Don't collapse that tension prematurely by choosing one side. Don't pretend you're only grateful when you're also grieving. Don't pretend you're only hurt when you're also relieved. Hold it all. The transcendent function only works when you give it the full spectrum of your truth. Think about the times you ignored your intuition, not the dramatic moments, but the quiet ones. The small voice that said something's not right here. The sensation in your gut that you rationalized away. The dreams that tried to warn you, filled with symbols of drowning, of being chased, of losing your voice. Your unconscious was speaking constantly, but you were too invested in the story you wanted to believe. The story where this person was your answer, where their love would heal you, where holding on tighter would make them stay. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, that layer of the psyche we all share, filled with archetypes and universal patterns. One of those patterns is the initiation, the death and rebirth, the descent into darkness that precedes the return to light. You're in that descent now, you didn't choose it. But that doesn't make it any less sacred. Every initiation requires a sacrifice. And what you're sacrificing is the version of yourself that believed love meant losing yourself. That believed devotion meant enduring what hurts. That believed your value was determined by someone else's capacity to see it. The removal you're experiencing isn't random. It's archetypal. It's the same pattern that appears in myths across cultures, where the hero must lose everything familiar before discovering what's real, where the seeker must wander in the wilderness before finding the treasure, where the wounded one must touch the depths of their pain before accessing their power. You're not special because this happened to you. You're human, and this is what the human journey toward wholeness demands. But here's what makes you unique: your willingness to do the work instead of just enduring the pain. Most people will experience this removal and immediately seek to fill the space with someone new. They'll repeat the pattern with different faces, different names, same frequency. They'll mistake familiarity for fate and intensity for intimacy. They'll spend their entire lives running from the very solitude that would set them free. You're not doing that. You're here willing to look, willing to feel, willing to understand. That choice changes the trajectory of everything that comes next. Let's talk about what it means to be truly alone versus lonely. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection from self projected onto the absence of others. You can be lonely in a crowded room, lonely in a relationship, lonely in the arms of someone who doesn't truly see you. Aloneliness, sacred aloneliness, is the experience of being so connected to your essence that external validation becomes secondary. It's not that you don't desire connection, it's that you're no longer willing to fracture yourself to obtain it. This distinction is crucial. The universe didn't remove them to condemn you to loneliness. It removed them to offer you the gift of aloneliness, the space to remember who you are when you're not performing for someone else's approval, when you're not managing someone else's emotions, when you're not contorting yourself into shapes that don't fit your soul. In that space, something extraordinary happens. You start to hear yourself again. Not the voice that was trained to please, to accommodate, to shrink. The voice that knows, the voice that's been waiting. Think about the concept of the anima and animus in Jung's work. Thema is the unconscious feminine aspect in men. The animus is the unconscious masculine aspect in women. When these internal figures aren't integrated, we project them onto others and call it love. We see in our partners the qualities we've disowned in ourselves. The man who hasn't integrated hisma seeks a woman to carry his emotions, his intuition, his capacity for depth. The woman who hasn't integrated her animus seeks a man to carry her power, her direction, her voice in the world. The person who was removed from your life was likely carrying one of these projections, and their removal is forcing you to reclaim what you outsourced. If you're a woman, maybe you gave them your power, your agency, your right to take up space. Now you have to find those qualities within yourself. If you're a man, maybe you gave them your emotional depth, your vulnerability, your connection to the soul. Now you have to develop those capacities internally. This isn't about gender roles. It's about wholeness, about becoming a complete human being who doesn't need another person to feel entire. The resistance you feel to this process is natural. The ego doesn't want to expand. It wants to survive. And survival to the ego means maintaining the known. Even if the known is painful, at least it's predictable. Growth is terrifying because it requires you to die to who you've been. And the ego experiences that death as annihilation. It can't see that on the other side of that death is rebirth. It can't trust that the self has a plan bigger than the ego's need for comfort. This is why spiritual traditions across time have emphasized surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of control. The recognition that there's an intelligence moving through your life that sees further than your conscious mind can. Jung called it the self. Others call it God, the universe, source, the Tao. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the recognition that you're not alone in this, that there's a purpose unfolding, even when it looks like chaos. Your task now is to cooperate with that unfolding instead of resisting it. To ask not why did this happen to me, but what is this trying to teach me? What part of myself am I being asked to reclaim? What pattern am I being invited to break? What new capacity is trying to emerge through this loss? These questions shift you from victim to participant, from someone life happens to into someone who's actively engaged in their own becoming. And as you engage, you'll notice something subtle, but profound. The quality of your energy begins to shift, not because you're forcing positivity or pretending to be healed, but because you're no longer leaking energy into a connection that couldn't hold it. You're no longer fragmenting yourself to maintain something that was never meant to last. You're gathering yourself back piece by piece, memory by memory, dream by dream, until you're whole again. Not the wholeness of having never been broken, the wholeness of having been